Chapter 1242. Back then, he had once met the Grand Tutor of Bei Mang, Li Qingshan, for the second time on the muddy road. He did not know whether it was before or after, but it was also good karma. The Qilin Taoist had said he was about to ascend, and he had indeed ascended. However, before Li Qingshan ascended, he had visited Beiliang as a streak of light and personally brought a message to Su Fengnian. It was a pity that apart from Xianxia Gu, who possessed a profound cultivation, no one else could appreciate such a shocking scene. The several thousand people outside the Pill Garden fields only took a blink of an eye, but to Su Fengnian and Li Qingshan, it felt like the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. After Li Qingshan ran into the Pill Garden fields, he staggered, almost colliding with Su Fengnian. After being supported by Su Fengnian with a smile, the old Taoist smiled brightly, but there was a hint of self-mockery in his voice. Since it's my first time ascending, and I've ascended to the high grade of the 18th grade, I thought I'd only ascend to the mid-grade at most. Even I found it rather difficult to control myself. It's mostly because of you. If I hadn't come, I wouldn't have been able to justify it. Su Fengnian bowed slightly. Congratulations on forging an immortal Taoist. Li Qingshan extended a finger and pointed at the top of his head. Let's cut to the chase. My superiors are watching. I'm treated as a living immortal in the human world, but I'm just a rash newcomer there. I'll have to act according to their mood. I've taken the liberty of coming here this time to say some last words to you. You can treat them as the last words of an immortal. After all, whether or not there will be any ascended immortals in the future is another matter altogether. Let's not talk about that. Su Fengnian, I'll ask you something. You just have to ask yourself. I have to leave after asking. I don't want to hear your answer. Su Fengnian answered politely. Please ask, Taoist. I'll think about it carefully. Li Qingshan straightened his face and asked sternly, Cultivators, attaining immortality and ascending to the ranks of immortals. Are you challenging the heavenly Tao? Practitioners of martial arts cultivate their bodies and maintain their health, prolonging their lives. Are you competing with the King of Hell? Since both of them go against the common sense of heaven and earth, why are there still ascended celestials and level 1 experts? Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. Are you here as a lobbyist for this world? Li Qingshan shook his head. Think about it again. Just when Su Fengnian wanted to say something, Li Qingshan pointed at Su Fengnian's chest before vanishing in a flash. Afterwards, a pillar of light invisible to the world rose up from the ground, rushing into the clouds and breaking through the sky. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the gradually dissipating light beam and the sea of clouds that remained in the sky. He suddenly remembered a kind of cultivation method on Mount Wudong that had been passed down for thousands of years and had been made public to the public. After ascending the mountain to cultivate, one would ask the heaven and earth. When one descended the mountain to cultivate, one would ask others. When one finally attained enlightenment, one would ask oneself. Cultivation. Cultivation was the truth. Su Fengnian began to realize that he seemed to have become far too busy after accompanying Su Xiao to meet the Empress of Bei Mang in the snowstorm. Moreover, this mental busyness was very self-absorbed. As a matter of fact, it was definitely not Su Xiao's original intentions. In the depths of his heart, Su Fengnian missed the Jianghu outside Beiliang. That had once been his childhood dream. He had once thought that it was the snowman he had compared to Shenyuan Qingfeng. Once it melted, it melted. He could not ask for it again. There were many people in the Jianghu who made Su Fengnian feel regret and guilt. Su Fengnian missed old Huang with a missing front tooth, the wanderer with a wooden sword, the old man with a sheepskin coat who was past his prime, Hong Shixiang who rode an ox, his eldest sister who had married off to a distant place in Jiangnan, and even the demon couple in the Duck's Head Green Inn. He missed the Bei Mang woman, Qing Zhu Nyang, who was constantly thinking about her dead daughter. There were many people in the Jianghu that he cared about, yet he could only watch on helplessly as they were separated from him, whether by life or death. There were many things that he had not done well. He could not stop old Huang from going to Martial Emperor City, he could not stop Wen Hua from being defeated in the Jianghu, he could not keep his eldest sister alive, he could not stop his second sister from sitting on the dragon throne, and he could not stop Sweet Potato from leaving Dunhuang City. As a result, Su Fengnian often felt that being the hereditary king of Beiliang was just a heavy burden that he could not escape from. It was not something that he truly wanted to do. Only now did Su Fengnian begin to think deeply about what he wanted to do after being asked by Li Qingshan. Su Fengnian gazed at the 9 heavens and said gently, The heavenly path is a single plank bridge that only the heavens can walk on. The great path is a broad path that everyone in the secular world can walk on. He had no idea just how similar this sentence was to Li Yufu, who could make countless bolts of lightning roll through the world. In the end, Su Fengnian said to himself, "What do I want to do? It's so simple. I just want to be Su Zhao's son." Su Xiao gave so many desperate commoners a path of survival in the spring and autumn period. As his son, I want to guard this path. If anyone refuses, I'll make them agree. Sui Xiegu, who had been waiting for a long time, rolled his eyes and said impatiently, "Kid, are you going to fight or not?" Su Fengnian smiled apologetically. He raised his hand and the Shu Dao sword emerged from its sheath. However, at this moment, a woman's voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. "Sui Xiegu, get down here." Su Fengnian took pleasure in Sui Xiegu's misfortune. He smiled and asked, "Old Senior Sui, are you going to fight or not?" Sui Xiegu's expression stiffened. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm going to fight. Why wouldn't I fight? Tantai Pingjing, there's no place for women to speak here." Su Fengnian restrained his smile and said, "It's fine. Li Chungang said that everything in the world is a matter of one sword." He glanced at the Shu Dao and said softly, "Go." The ancient sword, Shu Dao, instantly disappeared. Sui Xiegu suddenly raised his head. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "But this sword of mine is a bit too much." Almost at the same time, the 100 swords of the Wu family in Beiliang, Shenyuan Qingfeng, Luoyang, Su Ying, Tuoba, Deng Mao, the man who did not use a sword but carried a sword for his wife, the masters of the Beimang Chess and Sword Music School, Xianxia who was still traveling outside Mount Longhu, the Tongxi sword immortal Lu Baijie in the capital, the young Taoist Li Yufu who was rushing to Mount Wudong with his disciple Yufu, and Jianghu who was in a daze in the old capital of Da Chu, all raised their heads at the same time. Especially Jianghu, who hesitated and muttered to himself, "Borrow." The Wu family's sword tomb, Dongyue's sword pool, and the chess and sword music school were widely recognized as the places with the most swords in Jianghu. All the famous swords in the world flew into the sky to Beiliang. Chapter 1243. This was undoubtedly a marvelous scene. This was a scene that was destined to be passed down in Jianghu for a long time. The Xianxia Valley was almost instantly suppressed by tens of thousands of flying swords. Just a moment ago, the spectators outside the Pill Seed field only felt that there were black clouds covering the sky and the sun. The next moment, those black clouds fell on the human world and filled the entire Pill Seed field. The number of flying swords that broke through the air was so large that they were tightly packed together. Soon, the Xianxia Valley disappeared from everyone's sight. Other than swords, there were more swords. The young king of Beiliang seemed to have used a supernatural power that could move mountains and seas, creating a majestic and magnificent sword mountain out of thin air. At first, the sword mountain was still shaking visibly with the naked eye, but the shaking gradually decreased. With endless sword after sword, the sword mountain became taller and more stable, until the entire mountain peak was completely motionless. Everyone outside the Pill Seed field was dumbfounded. They had seen fights before, but they had never seen a fight like this. At this moment, the people who were not convinced that Su Fengnian had inexplicably become the most powerful person in the world were finally convinced. Even the pessimists who had no confidence in the imminent battle of Liangmang also felt that they should believe in Su Fengnian for once. Shu Dao was the last famous sword to fall, as if it was carelessly thrown to the top of the sword mountain by someone. The sword mountain that was showing signs of loosening had completely lost its vitality. Occasionally, one or two slanted flying swords would slide down the sword mountain and fall outside the Pill Seed field. A tall woman standing far away under the eaves of a house on the street curled up the corners of her mouth. She glanced at the sword mountain that was more than 300 feet high and mocked. "I told you to scram, but you didn't. Your century-old reputation is destroyed in a day." Su Fengnian did not stand at the foot of the mountain, nor did he return to the carriage. Instead, he silently appeared under the same roof. The woman who was taller than him looked at him and saw that Su Fengnian's face was pale but radiant. It seemed contradictory, but in fact, it was not. Tantai Pingjing saw it as a matter of course. Back then, her master was the same. His body was not strong, more like a weak scholar. However, her master's eyes were always as clean as the eyes of the young man in front of her. It was so clean that when her master pointed at the river python for her for the first time, She forgot to admire the white python that was about to transform. She only had eyes for her thin master. Even after decades, his master's catchphrase seemed to still ring in his ears. Big fool. Staring at Su Fengnian, Tan Tai Ping smiled calmly, like a little girl who had gone through untold hardships to find her favorite object. Su Fengnian did not know the inside story. Instead, he felt a little creeped out. She was old, let alone a woman who was 100 years old. She suddenly showed such childish behavior. Even with Su Fengnian's thick skin and wisdom, he could not bear it. Su Fengnian, who wanted to chat, quickly swallowed back the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Tan Tai Pingjing's loss of composure quickly disappeared. She recovered the indifferent expression of the chief great-grandmaster of the Qi cultivators in the south. She shifted her gaze and said calmly, "What is the name of this sword move? Does it have a name?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Isn't giving a famous name to a move something that only the common people would do? Senior Tan Tai, do you also have such a tacky habit?" She said, "I also need to eat, drink, defecate and sleep. I also know how to burp and fart. Why is it not tacky?" Back then, Su Fengnian advised Wen Hua not to be too infatuated with those unattainable heroines and fairies in the pugilistic world. This was because they also needed to defecate. Could it be that they could produce a flower by defecating? It was similar to Tan Tai Pingjing's self-mockery. But after all, this was the resentful words of beggar Su when he was in trouble. Now, it was difficult to find joy in the midst of bitterness. Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "It's different. This is tacky and unbearable when others say it. But when it comes from Senior Tan Tai, it still sounds like a fairy." Tan Tai Pingjing looked past the crowd that still refused to disperse. She looked at the tens of thousands of swords piled up like a mountain and sighed. "Congratulations to the king of Bailiang for returning to the celestial being realm." Su Fengnian lowered his voice and said, "If one day," she interrupted Su Fengnian and gave a straightforward answer, "I can lend it to you." Su Fengnian curled his lips. It was easy to talk to a smart person, but it was really boring. He rolled up his sleeves and looked at the magnificent sword mountain with Tan Tai Pingjing. It was supposed that only the master of all the swords in the world could move here. He thought of some past events. A long, long time ago, he liked to carry swords and sabers, but they were just embroidered pillows. She had a divine talisman, but it was not much better. Su Fengnian couldn't help but sigh. Tan Tai Pingjing asked, "When will we go to the border of Liangzhou to supervise the war?" Su Fengnian said slowly, "In a few days. Let's wait for the Golden Thread Weaving Bureau to send the new king's robe here first." Chapter 1244. With the Pill Garden as the center, Liangzhou city was so congested that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Because the battle had ended too quickly, many people outside only saw the scene of flying swords falling like rain. They did not know that the battle had already ended, so they continued to fight their way to the Pill Garden. This made it impossible for a large group of spectators to leave. It could be said that most of the residents of Liangzhou city had either arrived or were on their way to watch the battle. It was more lively than the New Year. Bailiang was not like Great Peace City, where people would turn out every few days. However, this was a rare occasion. The martial artists of Bailiang had been suppressed by the army. It was not easy for the king of Bailiang to personally come out and compete with someone. Plus, he was the #1 in the world. Even the calmest people of Liangzhou could not help but be moved. In the vast sea of people, about half a mile away from the Pill Garden, there was a pair of women who had completely opposite personalities but had extraordinary statuses. The two of them looked at each other. They were Song Huangmei, the only daughter of Song Yan of Lingzhou, and Li Fuzhen, the daughter of the administrator, Li Gongda. Li Fuzhen did not want to join in the fun at first. However, she could not endure the pestering of Song Huangmei, who liked to play with swords and sabers, so she reluctantly came. As a result, the carriage was blocked halfway. With Song Huangmei's liveliness, she jumped onto the roof of the carriage without saying anything. Li Fuzhen stood behind the coachman and did not miss the scene of the flying swords falling down. Song Huangmei, who stood on the roof of the carriage, waited for a long time. She did not see the result of the flying swords on the sword mountain flying away. She was both shocked and disappointed. She jumped to Li Fuzhen's side, her face full of desire. She clicked her tongue and said, "How was it? We didn't come in vain, right? How soul-stirring. If you didn't come, you would regret it to death." Li Fuzhen's expression was indifferent. Song Huangmei was not surprised. She clenched her fist and slammed it into the palm of her other hand. She said to herself, "No, I have to be that guy's disciple and learn martial arts. Even if I have to serve him tea and water every day, it's not a big deal. If I don't take such a top-notch expert as my master, isn't it a waste of God's gift?" Li Fuzhen wanted to say something but stopped. Song Huangmei looked at her with a pitiful face and begged, "Sister Fuzhen, my good sister, I know that you and that guy are childhood sweethearts. Your words are more useful than mine. Why don't you help me?" Li Fuzhen glared at him and said, "I advise you to give up." Li Fuzhen turned her head slightly and said coldly, "He and I have never seen eye to eye." Song Huangmei said with a mischievous smile, "It's better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. Moreover, it's fate for men and women to become enemies." Li Fuzhen snorted coldly. "That's also an ill-fated relationship." Song Huangmei rolled his eyes. Seeing that this path was not going to work, he just wanted to earn his own living. He racked his brains to think of a way to sneak into the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. In order to practice swordsmanship with him, he would just let the image of a lady from a respectable family go with the wind. At this moment, Li Fuzhen's mind was wandering thousands of miles away. Her mind was not focused. The situation in Beiliang could be said to be changing rapidly. Following Li Gongda's appointment as the deputy administrator, the officials in Beiliang knew that this year might be the last year that Li Gongda would be the top civil official. Furthermore, at that time, the administrator's performance in the military and political changes in Lingzhou was not satisfactory. Although he gave birth to a good son and was still closely related to the Su family, it was a rule since ancient times that a new emperor would bring in new officials. Furthermore, the situation now was not a smooth time for him to become a Taiping official. Sir Li, who had a mediocre reputation, might not be able to keep his position with the million-strong army of Bei Mang. As a result, the Lingzhou administrator's mansion, which was much less noisy than it had been a few years ago, became more and more deserted. The new and old people in the officialdom all ran over to provincial governor Su Beiji and Song Yan's side to get familiar with each other. Li Fuzhen had never paid much attention to the ups and downs of the officialdom. However, as his father grew older and did not have any younger children to play with, he spent his days at home dealing with flowers, fish, and insects. Li Fuzhen did not know if it was because his father's addiction to being an official had suddenly disappeared or if he had accepted his fate. However, Li Fuzhen was still more used to his father, who spent every day exchanging pleasantries and playing tricks with officials. Every day, he was full of fighting spirit. Every day, he knew who he should meet the next day and what to say. He was not like now, leisurely passing his days and being a rich and idle old man. Li Fuzhen felt an impulse for no reason. "If I beg you for the first time, will you agree to let my father be the Beiliang administrator for a few more years?" Li Fuzhen laughed self-mockingly and shook his head. Li Fuzhen, why would you have such a ridiculous and funny idea?" Song Huangmei understood the character of this elder sister Fuzhen. When she was stubborn, even 9 oxen and 2 tigers could not pull her back. Therefore, he gave up on the idea of asking her to recommend him. Song Huangmei laughed and approached Li Fuzhen. "Elder sister Fuzhen, I have always been very curious. Why did the administrator give you such a strange name? It is even rarer than me. What is Fu? What is Zhen?" Li Fuzhen was stunned for a moment. This question really stumped her. She had never thought deeply about her name. She had always thought that perhaps it was the famous Fu and the innocent Zhen. Perhaps her father wanted her to be carefree for the rest of her life. Song Huangmei saw that she was silent and did not bother to get to the bottom of it. He said to himself, "I have always heard that the guy once invited Jianghu Great Emperor to come to the Spring God Lake. With one punch, he destroyed the first Grand Master of Mount Longhu invited by the little celestial master Zhao Ningxian. In the past, I thought that there were no immortals in the world. Now I feel that it is really hard to say." Speaking of this, Song Huangmei laughed and said, "Elder sister Fuzhen, there is also the word Zhen in Jianghu Great Emperor." "Jianghu?" Li Fuzhen laughed. Then, suddenly, she could not laugh anymore. There was a word called lianying. Chapter 1245. Hundreds of elite cavalry from Lingzhou escorted the 3 carriages into Liangzhou city. The person at the front was Lingzhou Deputy General Han Laozhan. Looking at his armor, he was also one of the most powerful officers in Beiliang. This made the commoners who saw this scene click their tongues in wonder. They did not know who or what it was that made the Lingzhou military mobilize so many people, emptying half of the military officers in Lingzhou in an instant. Among the group of horses, there was one person who stood out. More accurately, he was like a chicken standing out from a flock of cranes. Among the large group of horses, cold swords, armor and sharp spears, only this person was wearing the uniform of a civil official. He was escorting the carriage at the front. From time to time, he would glance at the window. His eyes were filled with pride, which was exactly what Su Weisheng had said when he was young. He was the head of the Golden Weaving Bureau, Wang Ting. This time, he rushed to Bailiang Palace not because of the Weaving Bureau, but because this young family head of the Purple Gold Wang family had done a beautiful job. He was worthy of Lingzhou Deputy General Han Lao's Han being at his beck and call. Inside the 3 carriages, there was no gold or silver, nor was there any auspicious sign to pay tribute to Qingliang Mountain. There were only 3 pieces of clothing. After the Golden Weaving Bureau changed owners, Wang Ting focused on this matter. In the other territories of the Liang dynasty, the position of weaving officer was just a secret agent with a rank. They were the eyes and ears of the emperor. They had the privilege of sending a secret letter to the imperial study. Wang Ting was a weaving official who was promoted by Northern Liang after Li Shifeng retired and returned to his hometown. She had nothing to do with the talented and resourceful son of the Zhao family. Wang Ting, other than closely monitoring the Jianghu factions in Lingzhou, especially the rise of the Fish Dragon Gang, he was more of a weaving officer, doing the work of mending clothes. In the front carriage, there were 3 women. The oldest woman was not more than 30 years old. There was a small purple sandalwood box in the carriage. The youngest woman had a graceful figure and an outstanding appearance. Although she was wearing a woman's uniform made of ice, the details showed her thoughts. Her face was painted with a suitable shade of yume, and the stone used to draw her eyebrows was purchased from Xianxia, which was known as Lingzhou's women's money-squandering brothel. On her wrist was a disc-shaped carved fish jade pendant that symbolized good luck. At first glance, this woman could tell that she came from a wealthy family. Compared to the other 2 women with few accessories, she was worlds apart. However, this rich woman always talked and laughed with the older woman, but she made things difficult for the woman with the surname Su. Of course, these tricks were all under the table and would not be disliked by others. The young woman did not know why she was so hostile towards the poor widow. No matter how she looked at her, she did not feel comfortable. Perhaps it was because the Su family's woman's chest was even more bumpy than hers. Or perhaps it was because she was clearly a country bumpkin with a son, but she was more popular with men than she was in the Golden Weaving Bureau. It was just like one of the weaving officer's confidants who was blind and fell in love with this woman at first sight. It was as if he had been bewitched. He even rejected the marriage that his family had agreed on, saying that he would not marry anyone other than the Su family's woman. He even said that as long as the woman nodded, he was willing to marry her officially. He did not mind her past and would even treat her son as his own. It was not just this scholar who had wasted 20 years of studying. There was also a general in Lingzhou who was about to become a military officer in his early 30s. His future was bright, and his guests were either county governors or generals. What kind of good match could he not find? He was also shocked. This made the young woman in the carriage angry at the injustice of the world. The vixen with the surname Su had a rustic aura. Although her appearance was outstanding, it was not all that stunning. Could it be that she was a spirit that had walked out of the deep mountains and forests? Otherwise, why would all those men go crazy for her? She glanced at the woman who was silently criticizing the vixen Su. Then she smiled at the older woman and said, "Sister Song, when I was young, I heard my father say that he had once gone to Mount Qingliang. At that time, he was going hand in hand with County Governor Lu to participate in our little prince's birthday celebration. My father also said that the general had personally come down from his seat and drank a cup of green ant wine with them." The older woman smiled and agreed. "Zhao, who doesn't know that your father is the god of wealth in Lingzhou? It is a good thing for him to go to the prince's estate. Zhao, your literary talent is good. This time, if you go to Mount Qingliang with official Wang, you might catch the prince's eye and accidentally become one of the popular female scholars in Wutongan. When that time comes, don't forget about Sister Song." The young woman who was nicknamed Zhao, covered her mouth and smiled. Borrowing Sister's auspicious words, the female scholar really does not dare to have extravagant hopes. It would be a great fortune for Zhao to be that prince's maidservant. The young woman who had left her home to join the weaving bureau, Su Qing, had a faint expression. She did not want to participate in the conversation between the two women beside her. In reality, she still did not know how she had been chosen by the Yuzhou government as a female embroiderer. She had been chosen along with a dozen other women who were clever and skilled in their hands. She had then gone to the rich and fertile Lingzhou, which had the reputation of being a little Jiangnan. She could only explain that she had been in her hometown at Tumbling Horse Pass when she had the time to sew some personal items for the women of the Yuzhou government officials. That was how she had this inexplicable opportunity. In reality, she was not very willing to go to the distant Lingzhou at first. Her son, Yu Song, was still young. Although their family did not have much farmland, it could not be delayed. The countryside had always been like this. If there was less sweat, there would be less harvest. God's eyes were very sharp. However, the village's village chief said that this was a great honor for Zhao village. As long as she went to the Lingzhou Weaving Bureau, not only would the village exempt Yu Song's tuition fees from the private school, they would also ask the neighbors to help take care of her family's crops. Yu Song could even stay with the teacher. This was a great thing. Even so, without any worries, Su Qing still asked Yu Song. The child was sensible. Although he loved his mother, he patted his chest and said it was fine. His mother could go to Lingzhou and he could take care of himself. He also promised that when his mother came back, he would be able to recite the 300,000 by heart. Thinking of her sensible child, Su Qing's heart warmed and the corners of her mouth curled up. Zhao glanced at the woman's smile from the corner of her eyes and felt hatred in her heart. This Su Qing's appearance was just like that, but it was this kind of silent charm that could seduce men. It was not that she did not want to learn, but she could not learn. In the end, she could only resentfully give up. Out of sight, out of mind, Zhao said proudly to the average-looking Sister Song. Sister Song, of the 3 python robes and phoenix robes that were made by the Weaving Bureau, the python robe is naturally for our prince to wear. The other 2 should be for the 2 Wang Fei. My father once drank and chatted merrily with a head steward of the Liu family. At the beginning of the year, that steward privately said that the young miss of their family might not be able to become the main wife. However, 1 main wife and 3 side concubines have always been a long-standing rule in the Liyang sect. Even if the young miss of the Liu family isn't the main wife, she would still be the first of the side concubines. The young miss of the Spring God Lake Wang family is ranked behind her. Sister Song, it's fine if you've heard this before, but you can't tell anyone else. There will be big trouble. The older woman knew that no matter how small the matters of the imperial family were, they were still more important than the monstrous matters of the common people. How could she dare to carelessly gossip about such a secret? Hearing this, she was startled and became even more respectful towards Zhao, who was technically her subordinate. She thought to herself that in the past, she would occasionally put on airs in front of Zhao. On this trip to the prince's estate, shouldn't she be a little more careful to mend the pen after the sheep were lost? The specifications of the Golden Silk Weaving Bureau were roughly the same as the other major weaving bureaus of the Liang dynasty. Among the 3 major workshops, other than the silk machine room, the other 2 workshops were exactly the same. There were more than 600 people in total, and more than 400 looms, such as her, who were registered in the Weaving Bureau, and temporary residents like Su Qing, who were recruited temporarily. The chief weaving official, Wang of Ting, was said to be the new Prince Liang's favorite. She didn't know whether this was true or not, but the local yamen of Lingzhou and the Fish Dragon Gang didn't dare to not give Lord Wang some face. As a result, the Weaving Bureau was able to obtain benefits from both sides. This made her, a small official in the silk workshop, feel honored. She was no longer like before, when Li Shifeng was in charge of the Weaving Bureau, where no one cared about him or loved him. The reason why she didn't ostracize Su Qing like Zhao was because she had a secret hidden in her heart. She had once seen Lord Wang reprimanding someone in a secluded place from afar. It had to be known that the person being reprimanded was a military officer who held half of the county's military power. The military officer's son, who had an excellent reputation, was slightly older than Lord Wang. At first, he wanted to retort, but after Lord Wang said something, she saw the military officer's expression change drastically. When the military officer, who usually walked with a swagger, left, she looked like a frosted eggplant. She felt like she had lost her soul. From then on, the military officer never came to the Golden Silk Weaving Bureau to pester the young widow, Su Qing. She secretly guessed that the young woman, Su Qing, was either a lucky woman who Wang Lufting himself kept as a mistress in a golden house, or she was the exclusive property of some great figure behind the scenes in Lingzhou. Otherwise, she really couldn't understand who had the ability to send a rural woman from the border of Yuzhou to the popular Lingzhou weaving bureau and receive a unique double salary. The key was that Su Qing still didn't know the truth. She always thought that she was treated the same as other female craftsmen. Chapter 1246. Su Qing, who was sitting upright and still, took advantage of the time when the two women were chatting to sneakily stretch out a finger. Her fingertip lightly brushed across the sandalwood box. It was only after she entered the weaving bureau that she learned that there were some pieces of wood in the world that were more valuable than human lives. She had never understood the ways of the world. She thought that after completing this task, she would muster up the courage to speak to the master swordsman in her silk workshop, and ask if she could take a leave of absence to go home and see her children, and check on the harvest in the fields. For some reason, Su Qing thought of the clothes in the 3 boxes. It was really shocking. When the master had finished, he had said to Weaving Wang that according to the normal process and manpower of the Jiangnan Weaving Bureau, not to mention the 3 boxes, just the python robe that the Prince of Northern Liang was going to wear would take 3 years. Moreover, they might not be able to do it better than the Golden Weaving Bureau. Su Qing had no doubts about this. She had personally participated in the process and knew better than anyone else how difficult it was. There were dozens of people involved in each process, from the master to the lowest craftsman. Almost everyone had to work for more than 16 hours a day. Therefore, the weaving bureau was brightly lit every night. Her hand had been pricked hundreds of times before she lost count of the number of times. That python robe, which came from the dragon painting master, had 9 sketches. Each one was lifelike and intimidating. She had only seen the one that had been selected. She didn't even dare to look at the python dragon in the painting. She only felt that it was on the verge of spitting out clouds and smoke from the sketches. Su Qing was one of the many gardeners. This python robe was the most precious makeup flower in the Yunjin brocade. It had reached an unprecedented number of 1,800 flowers. Furthermore, if one was picked incorrectly, the entire effort would be wasted and they would have to start all over again. Previously, there was a female craftsman who had a good relationship with Su Qing. Because she picked incorrectly, Weaving Wang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, had ordered people to beat her to death. At the time, Su Qing did not care and pleaded for mercy for her. She only did what she could and left the rest to fate. Unexpectedly, the female craftsman escaped the disaster, but she also lost her position as an official craftsman and was expelled from the weaving bureau. The clever Su Qing had made an exception for the 3 pieces of clothing. In particular, the black robe embroidered with golden pythons had 18 golden pythons. After it was completed, it was truly a rare noble item in the world. Even a village girl like Su Qing, who considered herself ignorant and inexperienced, dared to say that other than His Majesty, who sat on the dragon throne in Great Peace City, there was no other king in the world whose python robe could compare to it. As for the 2 pieces of the future king of Beiliang's wedding dress, Su Qing did not have much thoughts. She was not like Zhao who would be swayed at first glance and fantasize about how good it would be if she herself wore it. The caravan drove straight in and arrived at the foot of Mount Qingliang. Wang Lufting felt relieved. This time, there were more than 20 people accompanying the weaving bureau, but not everyone was lucky enough to enter the royal residence to broaden their horizons. There were 3 carriages, 3 chests, and 3 pieces of clothing. In each carriage, there were 3 female craftsmen guarding the red sandalwood chests. Wang Lufting had already planned that each carriage could only have 1 woman to try on the clothes for the king of Beiliang and the 2 future princesses of the Lu and Wang families. The python robe was undoubtedly of the utmost importance. The female craftsman called Situ Huazhao had her father use countless favors and a full 6,000 taels of silver to beg an expert to help her. Wang Lufting smiled coldly. She wanted to dress the king of Beiliang with just this? After Wang Lufting dismounted, he called out the names of the 2 carriages that would be responsible for carrying the chests into the residence. The 2 women who were called out were so excited that their eyes immediately filled with tears. Their family backgrounds were clean, their appearances were delicate, and their personalities had always been honest. They were definitely not shrewd women who would do something superfluous. Wang Lufting was very confident in them. Then on the side of the first carriage, Wang Lufting, the Lord of Weaving, looked meaningfully at the unknown Su Qing. He extended a finger and pointed at her, but did not say anything else. Su Qing was stunned on the spot. She had always thought that Situ Huazhao, the proud daughter of heaven, would be the one to try on the clothes for the young king of Beiliang. She had never thought that it would be her. For a moment, she was at a loss. Wang Lufting frowned. If it had been anyone else, he would have been furious. But since it was her, Wang Lufting was unusually patient. He glanced lightly at Su Qing and stopped to wait for her. The reason for this was because Wang Lufting knew more. This young widow's background was very simple, but the man behind the scenes who had single-handedly sent her into Wang Lufting's territory was someone that even he, the head of the Golden Weavers, could not afford to offend. Yozhou's General Huang Fucheng. This man was truly worthy of being called the king of Beiliang's trusted aide. Wang Lufting, compared to this man who was famous for his ruthlessness in Beiliang, was willing to concede defeat, whether in terms of the maturity of his official cultivation or the degree of his viciousness and mercilessness. Wang Lufting had always thought that the young widow at Tuma Pass in Yanji County was the woman that Huang Fucheng had taken a fancy to. Thus, he did not hesitate to pinch his nose and treat her with courtesy. Wang Lufting naturally did not know that when the Yuzhou general saw this young widow, he did not dare to be the slightest bit rude. Su Qing braced herself. She carried the not-so-heavy sandalwood chest and followed the crowd into the prince's residence in a muddle-headed state. Along the way, Su Qing forgot to take a look at the world-famous Tide Hark Lake. In the past, when people in the weaving bureau talked about the lake, they would always be full of longing. They would use hearsay and exaggeration to describe the scene of thousands of carps swimming in the Tide Hark Lake. Wang Lufting slowly ascended the mountain. First, he brought the two chests to the entrance of two elegant and quiet courtyards. Finally, under the lead of the head butler, he walked to an extremely inconspicuous courtyard that was even higher up. It was not Wutong'an. It was the residence of the old Prince Liang, Su Xiao. Even the mentally tough Wang Lufting was shocked. Wang Lufting let out a long breath and whispered, "Su Qing, do things cleverly and naturally. If you are really nervous, I can let you stay outside the courtyard for a while. You can go in when your limbs are not stiff." Su Qing's face was pale. She hugged the chest. After hearing the weaving bureau's words, she became even more nervous and showed signs of tears. The person inside was the king of Beiliang. She had never even seen a high-ranking official like the county magistrate in her life. How could she not be nervous? Wang Lufting looked at her uneasiness and felt a little vexed. If she had known earlier, she would have let Situ Huazhao carry the box. In any case, that woman's ambition was not small and her courage was not small. She would not be so timid. As for her uneasiness, it was nothing in this mansion where the father and son of the Liang dynasty had different surnames. The head butler leading the way was still smiling. He did not even have the slightest intention of urging them. But Wang Lufting was familiar with the ways of the world and knew very well that he had been implicated by Su Qing. If he wanted to enter Mount Qingliang in the future, unless he was summoned by the king of Beiliang, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The head butler would not argue with the woman. But in the heart of this well-deserved Beiliang bigwig, just as Wang Lufting had expected, he had a bad impression of Wang Lufting's purple gold Wang family and the entire golden weaving bureau. Wang Lufting looked at Su Qing's increasing panic and sighed in his heart. The head butler narrowed his eyes and glanced at the young weaving official, then turned to the woman and smiled warmly. "Miss, it's fine. Our prince is the most easygoing person in the world. Don't worry and go in. It doesn't matter if you do something wrong. Why don't we make a bet? If His Highness speaks harshly to you, when you come out, I will give you 10 taels of silver. If His Highness is really as I said, very easy to talk to, miss, you will have to give me 10 taels of silver. How about it?" Su Qing finally relaxed. She bit her lip and nodded. She was no longer at a loss as to where to put her hands and feet. The head butler smiled and helped push open the courtyard door. He waited for her to step over the threshold before gently closing the door. Then, Su Qing saw the back of a young man standing alone under a loquat tree that was still green in autumn. The loquat tree was lonely. He was also lonely. Su Qing was stunned. She blinked, thinking that her eyes were playing tricks on her. After blinking hard, she still felt that it was inconceivable. Why was his figure so similar to the young master who had passed through Tumbling Horse Pass twice? That person turned around. Su Qing immediately felt relieved. But when she saw his eyes, she was on tenterhooks. Their appearances were not the same person, but their eyes and eyes were too similar. Su Qing was completely stunned. She knew that the young vassal king in front of her was destined not to be that person, But at this moment, she thought of that person at an inappropriate time. She really missed him. Little Miss Su Qing knew that she should not be like this, but she was like this. Su Fengnian was also stunned for a moment, but he quickly figured out the reason. It was definitely Huang Fu Cheng's superfluous action. But since it had come to this, he did not want to say anything more. Walking in front of her, he took the chest and said indifferently, "This king can wear his own clothes. You just have to wait in the courtyard. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, leave. Tell Wang Lufting outside the door that this king said that the python robe was not bad. Also, tell him not to be in a hurry to leave the mansion." Su Qing nodded blankly. He did not know if she understood. Su Fengnian turned around and smiled. As he was walking up the steps, he suddenly heard a timid shout from behind him. It was definitely the most courageous shout the woman had ever made in her life. "Young Master Su?" He did not stop walking. Her face was red, and she was sweating profusely. A few strands of hair stuck to her cheeks. She raised her arm and secretly wiped them. She smiled happily. It was not him. It would be good if it was not him. If it was not him, they might meet again. She still owed him money. He said it was 1,500 taels of silver, and she had to pay it back in 50 years. She was not willing to admit that she agreed to go to the Golden Silk Weaving Bureau because she heard him say that he was a scholar traveling in Lingzhou. Inside the room, the light was dim. Su Fengnian put on the python robe that was obviously made by the Yu dynasty. It fit very well. Just like the one Su Xiao wore back then. Chapter 1247. In the dead of the night, a majestic group of horses quietly galloped out of the north gate of Liangzhou city. Among them were the 800 white horse followers who had followed the new Prince Yi, the 100 or so swordsmen of the Wu family who had just arrived at Liangzhou, and a dozen or so qi cultivators from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea. The leader of the group was the current leader of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, Wu Luding and Cui Hua, the pair of sword attendants, Tan Tai Pingjing, the head of the qi cultivators in the south, and the sickly old swordsman with white eyebrows, Sui Xiegu. However, the one who rode alongside Su Fengnian was not the aforementioned people. It was Su Beiji, who was supposed to be in charge of government affairs in Lingzhou. Su Fengnian did not care about Zhu Zi's sudden arrival. He was more than happy. During the day, there were some hidden rumors from Mount Qingliang. It was said that when the provincial governor came to the residence, the prince personally carried the basin. When the provincial governor washed his face, the prince even smiled. This confused the people in the residence. Should they say that the prince was courteous, or should they say that Su Beiji, the young governor of the border, was too popular? Anyway, the northern barbarian, Su Beiji, as the grandson of the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, had a sensitive identity. However, he was able to rise up the ranks in Beiliang. Outsiders could only see the flowers in the fog. Su Beiji brought a piece of terrible news. He thought that the remnants of Western Shu, led by the crown prince, Su Su, had caused Beiliang's plans to go down the drain. They even helped the king of Shu, Chen Jibao, become more arrogant. In Su Beiji's words, it was like Beiliang had finally fattened up a watchdog. Not only would he not be able to eat meat, but he would also not be able to guard Beiliang's gate. He might even bite back in the future. Su Fengnian was rather calm about this. When he first found Su Su and this old man's son, Zhao Dingxiu, in a small town in Beimang, he did not have much hope after interacting with him. Firstly, Su Su was too lazy. If he was in Jianghu, he might do his best. However, if he was asked to go to the temple and scheme, he believed that Su Su would not hesitate if he could quit. Relying on this kid to revive Western Shu was more disappointing than relying on him, His Royal Highness, to carry the flag for Beiliang. It was simply hopeless. Furthermore, Zhao Dingxiu was half an imperial tutor. As long as he could revive his country, it did not matter who helped him. The relationship between Beiliang and Su Fengnian was not enough for Zhao Dingxiu to disregard the big picture and wrestle with Chen Jibao. When all was said and done, the emperor of the Zhao clan had sent Zhao Kai to the western regions with the intention of cutting off the connection between Beiliang and Shu Zhao before forming a huge arc encirclement with the three western regions. Unfortunately, he was intercepted by Su Fengnian and failed at the Iron Gate. However, when Chen Jibao entered Shu and was conferred the title of king, he inherited the strategic plan of the Northwest. Although Su Fengnian took advantage of this opportunity to win over the sixth jewel master and started to infiltrate the western regions, Chen Jibao quickly returned the favor and sat in western Shu while looking at southern Zhao. It could be said that both sides won and lost in this battle. However, to Great Peace City, which was watching from the other side, it was a win for them. Without Xu Zhao, which could allow Beiliang to retreat, Beiliang was equivalent to an extended strategic location. Even if the battle was tight, they could only fight to the death until the Su family's accumulated resources in Su Zhao's hands were exhausted. However, if he only wanted to make Su Fengnian angry, Su Beiji wouldn't have personally come to Mount Qingliang. The Lingzhou provincial governor's urgent audience came with a draft regarding the reform of the Beiliang's military. Previously, Su Fengnian listened to Chen Shiliang's suggestion and carried out a series of sweeping and decisive actions to clean up the accumulated abuses in the Beiliang army. A large number of captains and miscellaneous generals who were as numerous as the hairs on an ox were all fired. This made the originally unremarkable position of captains in the three provinces of Liang, Yuling, and Lingzhou become a powerful martial arts club that was only second to the three generals of a province. Then, he took back a large number of miscellaneous generals who were originally meant for the meritorious officials to retire at home. This shook the foundation of many of the general families in Beiliang. After the older generation of generals withdrew from the border, the titles that they wanted to pass down to their descendants as family heirlooms were swept into the trash basket of history. Most of the family's descendants had never personally accomplished anything. This created an invisible gap, because the firewood for a family's torch was taken away. Su Beiji said that in times of peace, whether Mount Qingliang robbed the rich to help the poor or even killed the goose that laid the golden eggs, it wouldn't affect the Su family's position in Beiliang. However, right now, they were at a critical juncture where Bei Mang's million-strong army was pressing down on the border. Whether or not the general families were willing to contribute, they had to fight for it. After leaving Liangzhou, Su Fengnian didn't interrupt from beginning to end. It was always Su Beiji who spoke tirelessly about the pros and cons. Su Fengnian wasn't someone who couldn't listen to opinions, but he was indeed a bit troubled. To be more precise, he had difficulties that he couldn't speak of. If it had been anyone else who brought up this matter, Su Fengnian would have accepted it without hesitation. However, since it was Su Beiji who brought it up, Su Fengnian had to think carefully. Su Beiji didn't mind Su Fengnian's silence. He continued to talk about the general framework of Beiliang's army in his mind. The border army doesn't need to draw legs on a snake. Just follow the old rules and do things. The local officers, both old and new, are also clear about their duties. However, right now, Beiliang needs more people who are willing to fight on the battlefield. In the Battle of Liangmang, Beiliang was slightly better than Bei Mang in terms of leading soldiers. In terms of bravery, Beiliang had the upper hand. However, the more this is the case, the more we can't lose too much to Beiliang in terms of tenacity. Our Beiliang can't win 10 battles or dozens of battles only to lose everything because of one big battle. Chapter 1248. Su Beiji's eyes were resolute as he said in a low voice, Beiliang's foundation is not strong enough to begin with. Now, the general families who have no hope of defending their positions are rushing to leave Beiliang. It's true that most of these people are vermin, but can't they really become part of Beiliang's fighting force? The battle between countries has always been about who can endure more and who can take more hits. According to my plan, Beiliang will have the titles of 3 great military generals. These 12 titles are destined to be given to the outstanding people of the border army who have made great contributions in battle. However, there will be 12 ranks of military generals in the ranks of colonel, and cavalry. There will also be 2 great civil generals. These titles will be tailor-made for the wavering spectators, for the general families who are willing to contribute money and effort, and for the scholars who are willing to come up with ideas. Of course, you have to ensure that these titles are recognized by the Liang Imperial Court. If possible, you have to ask the Great Peace City's Ministry of War for an edict to announce to the world. You have to ask the Zhao family's emperor and the Ministry of War and Ministry of Personnel not only to recognize the various ranks of Beiliang, but also to promise that any Beiliang official who wishes to leave the country can be demoted by 1 or 2 ranks. They cannot use any excuse to refuse. Su Fengnian laughed bitterly and said, Zhu Zi, do you really think that the Great Peace City's Ministry of War is a small courtyard in my house? Although my relationship with Lu Baijie is not bad, I'm sure that sword immortal Tang Shi will fall to the ground when she receives the edict. Right now, in order to suppress the local powers, even old generals like Yan Zhenchuan and Yang Shenxing can be sent to their deaths. How can they slap their own mouths? When the time comes, they will take care of Beiliang. If Gu Jiantang wants to demand an exorbitant price, do you think the Ministry of War and the person on the dragon throne will agree? Su Beiji shook his head decisively and said, "It's not the same. The Zhao family can't even fend for themselves. Right now, they're relying on Beiliang to fight to the death with Bei Mang. If we submit this report, we'll have a 50% chance of success." Su Fengnian also shook his head and sighed. "It's not that we can't send the memorial, but you have to know that last time, we relied on Song Dongming's suggestion that Beiliang send troops to pacify the Guangling Path, and the imperial court had already reluctantly sent over the grain. I don't think it's going to happen this time." Su Beiji loosened his grip on the reins and rubbed his hands. He said softly, "The memorial isn't going to be sent to the Ministry of War right now. Let's see when Chao Chongqing will be able to beat up the imperial court." Su Fengnian nodded and suddenly asked, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" Su Beiji turned to look at him and asked calmly, "Are you afraid that Chen Shiliang and I are like fire and water? Both of us think that a mountain can't accommodate 2 tigers?" Su Fengnian let out a sigh of relief and said jokingly, "It's good that you know what you're doing. The 2 of you are both my friends and my master's precious unpolished jade. If either of you is gone, I'll die of heartache." Su Beiji also asked, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, "You can read my mind but I can't read yours." Su Beiji didn't attack Su Fengnian like he usually did. Instead he said, "I think that once Liang Mang starts the war, we have to find a reason to not give Gu Jiantang the opportunity to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight on the eastern front." Su Fengnian froze and said, "Not only does this touch you on Benqi's bottom line, I'm afraid that even Zhang Julu and Qi Yanglong won't agree." Su Beiji said calmly, "Even Wang Xianji will lose. There shouldn't be anyone in the world who can win every battle." Su Fengnian was speechless. This was probably the biggest difference between Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang. When Chen Shiliang did things, he always liked to start from the smallest details. Very rarely did he make a move that gave off the feeling of being bold and bold. But Su Beiji was different. He seemed to have a higher vantage point and was more insightful. But there was no difference between the 2. At least that was the case for now. Su Beiji smiled for no reason. Su Fengnian looked at this guy in confusion. Under the moonlight, Su Beiji looked to the north and said softly with a smile, "When I was young, I always wanted to go south with my grandfather and fight Beiliang. I didn't expect it to be the other way around." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "You really don't have anyone in Norland that you care about? For example, do you have a girl you grew up with? Are there any good men who share the same interests? Are there any bastards who you want to ride on top of his head to vent your anger?" Su Beiji's face was calm as she replied softly, "No. A plan could be worth a city, and a few words could set the foundation of a country." Su Fengnian was waiting to see who would become the first strategist in Beiliang to be worthy of such a title. At this time, one of the 100 swords of the Wu family sped up and passed by Wu Luding and the female sword attendant. He came to Su Fengnian's side and cupped his fists. He said loudly, "I am Xianxia Gan, from a fallen country. If I may be so bold as to ask, would your highness be willing to spa with me when you are free?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Is it for yourself or for Western Shu?" Xianxia Gan, who had once lost to the sword emperor of Western Shu by half a sword, said honestly, "Both." Su Fengnian pulled on the reins of his horse and rubbed salt on the wound of an old swordsman. He said lazily, "Senior Sui, someone wants to spar with me. Shouldn't they ask you first?" It was indeed Su Fengnian's latest defeated opponent, Sui Xiegu. He was so angry that his white eyebrows fluttered. He snorted coldly but did not refuse. The haggard Xianxia Gan said calmly, "I know that I am not your highness's opponent, but if I don't use this sword in my life, my conscience will not be at ease." Cui Hua, who was resting with her eyes closed, asked coldly, "Xianxia Gan, after entering the tomb, do you have any sword of your own to speak of?" Xie Banjian's expression suddenly dimmed. He wanted to speak but stopped. Wu Luding laughed and said, It's fine. Since we have left that lifeless place, we don't have to pay too much attention to those rules and regulations. Grandfather Xie said it was a spar, not a life and death battle. I believe that the king of Beiliang is magnanimous. If we don't fight when we are in an invincible position, it would be unreasonable." "That's right." Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at the sword crown of the Wu family who he had never dealt with. "All right, let's spar too?" Wu Luding snorted and said angrily, Afraid of you? You pick the place, I pick the time. Su Fengnian said, right here. Wu Luding said shamelessly, 100 years later. Most of the Wu family's swordsmen had strange expressions on their faces. To have such a young master as their leader was really a disgrace. A middle-aged swordsman also sped up his horse and asked with a smile, I heard that the king of Bailiang started practicing with the blade? Su Fengnian asked with a smile, what, you Zhang Wantai, lost to Gu Jiantang in the peak battle in front of the Wu family sword tomb, and now you want to get back at me, who also practices the blade? Zhang Wantai was also honest. He nodded and said, I think so, but it is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The beautiful swordsman Wu Luding called Auntie Nalan did not go up to join in the fun, but cleared her throat and asked with a laugh, Wang Yi, I will not seek humiliation by competing with you. I just want to ask a small question. Wang Yi, you are so handsome. If I were 10 or 20 years younger, would we be able to live together? Su Fengnian turned his head and said with a smile, Sister, how about you be the wet nurse for my children in the future? The woman's chest rose and fell with the movement of the horse's back. Her aura was turbulent. After hearing this, she didn't get angry. Instead, she teased, if I had known earlier, I would have gone to find Princess Consort and shamelessly claimed her as my sister. Perhaps Prince Yi would have been able to call me that now. Su Fengnian said helplessly, fortunately, you did not claim my mother as your sister 20 years ago. The sword maniac Helion, the sword monk Cui Mei Gong, and the oldest swordsman of the Wu family sword tomb all smiled. After a wave of laughter, Su Fengnian said, you are all famous grandmasters of the sword. If you want to compete with me, then forget it. I will not agree. On this trip, Su Fengnian only had a cold blade at his waist. His fingers rubbed the hilt of the blade at his waist. He raised his head to look at the sky and smiled. When we reach the border, you should see the best blade in the world and see how good it is. In the middle of winter, when it was snowing, the cold blade would be unsheathed and held horizontally. When there was no one around, it would cut the snow. Some people would cut off their heads and drink the blood. Chapter 1249. There are 2 more chapters in the evening. Northwest Frontier Fortress, a lonely city, surrounded by clouds and sand. At dawn, a tall Qi refinement grandmaster pulled the reins and reined in the horse. Looking at the desolate scene of the vast sky and high ground, she felt particularly peaceful. She only had 2 horsemen at her side. Wu Luding and the female sword attendant had parted ways with the Wu clan cavalry a day ago. Under the escort of the white horse Yitzong, they had headed together to the base of the northern Liang Protectorate that was overseen by Mount Chu. If everything went as expected, this group of top-class swordsmen would serve as the sharpest and most secretive blade tip of the northern Liang border army. As for the young minister, Su Beiji, he had already turned back on his horse. She, Su Fengnian, and Sui Xiegu continued north. They directly passed through the border defense line of Liangmang and swaggered into the southern dynasty's Dragon Waste state. Tantai Pingjing bent down and stroked the soft mane of the horse. This horse was extraordinarily handsome. Indeed, only Bailiang could raise such an outstanding horse. She looked up at the quiet young Prince Liang sitting high on the horse. Along the way, intelligence reports were constantly sent to him. Su Fengnian read them and burned them casually. It seemed that he had not once interfered with the border military affairs. This kind of hands-off boss seemed very relaxed and comfortable. It was as if he could do the job well for anyone who sat in his position. However, Tantai Pingjing was not a frog at the bottom of the well. Since Bailiang claimed to have 300,000 cavalry, if they were in a peaceful world, not a person with the surname Su could be the Prince of Peace. The Zhao family of Liang would have already cooked the hound. Not to mention, in the current chaotic world, Beimang's million-strong army was pressing on the border. If any mediocre lord who could not convince the masses had the Northwest Gate, before the Beimang army showed their strength, the Bailiang side would have been in chaos. No matter how many border troops there were, as long as the army's morale was slack, even if they gave Bailiang 300,000 soldiers, they would still not be able to stop the fierce army of Beimang that was released from the cage by the old woman. Su Fengnian's thumb and forefinger subconsciously rubbed the rough reins. He stopped the horse on the slope and looked into the distance. The fire and smoke sank to the west, the valley was quiet and the mountains were empty. But the general could fight 100 battles without the emperor building the Great Wall. This was a frontier fortress poem that was popular in the Central Plains. The poet was a poor scholar with a bright future, but trouble came from his mouth. Because of this poem, the poet was suspected to be cold and charming in the literary world. After the poet returned to the Central Plains to be an official, he wasted more than 10 years in the local officialdom and never got promoted. In the end, he was depressed and resigned. When Su Fengnian first traveled in Jianghu with Huang, he once went to the poet's hometown. Although he was very embarrassed at that time, it was not a problem for him to pretend to be rich and buy a pot of wine to visit. Unfortunately, he only saw the moss and did not see the poet. Su Fengnian gently exhaled a turbid breath. At that time, he only thought that the emperor of the Zhao family must have done something. Later, when he personally experienced some of the officialdom rules, he gradually understood that it was not the man sitting on the throne who was so narrow-minded. It was the local officials who were trying to figure out the emperor's mind. Not to mention the distance, just the nearby Beiliang, how many officials, in order to curry favor with him, often used expensive antiques, calligraphy and paintings to establish a relationship with the Beiliang's Lu family in Qingzhou? How many unknown back doors did they open for the Lu family's children in Beiliang's officialdom to be unimpeded? Even some of the best teachers in Beiliang's academies favored the Lu family's children who had mediocre literary talent and hoped to establish a relationship with the Lu family and then the Su family. If it were not for Lu Qingyan's opinion, Lu Feiqi, the head of the Lu family, would have used this opportunity to become the leader of Beiliang's literary world. Su Fengnian could not help but feel a little sad. He still remembered the ordinary bamboo lantern that the ancestor of the Lu family gave to Lu Feiqi before he died. He wanted Lu Feiqi to take over the lantern that swayed with the chaotic times and strive to pass it on. Obviously, Lu Feiqi, who had long complained about the family moving to the barren Beiliang, suddenly found that the Lu family had a great reputation in Beiliang after the process of taking root in Beiliang was too smooth. Not only Lu Feiqi, but the entire Lu family was too complacent and was far less conceited than the old fox Wang Linquan, who was a relative of the emperor. But what really made Su Fengnian depressed was Wang Linquan's obedience. The more the Wang family of the Spring God Lake deliberately tolerated the scholarly Lu family, wasn't it deliberately digging a hole for the Lu family to jump into? Compared to the Lu family's insensibility, Wang Linquan's overt schemes were actually more of a headache for Su Fengnian. But these were difficult to resolve and could not be explained clearly. As the son-in-law of the two families, Su Fengnian could not use his status as the king of Beiliang to bully others. The more he did, the more mistakes he would make. In the end, he could not escape the saying that he favored one and discriminated against the other. Fortunately, these thorny matters were not urgent. Moreover, Lu Qingyan handled things appropriately. Even his second sister, Su Weisheng, admitted that she could not find any flaws in Lu Qingyan. Between women, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, sister-in-law and sister-in-law, these relationships were all like swords and knives that did not see blood. Men were naturally incomparably miserable when they were involved. Su Fengnian, or in other words, Beiliang, was facing a great disaster. Ever since Su Shao was conferred the title of king and took over Beiliang, Beimang had been eyeing them covetously. As long as they could destroy Beiliang and bypass the eastern border where Gu Jiantang was overseeing, then the fertile Central Plains would be like a woman waiting to be slaughtered. How could Beimang, a man who could not endure the hunger and thirst, not risk his life to attack Beiliang? In the past, under the planning of Su Shao and his master, Li Yishan, although Beiliang did not have the problem of whether to defend or not, there was still enough space for the Beiliang cavalry to move around. They could take the refugees and retreat to the western regions. They could also retreat to western Shu and Nanzhao as support, enough to fight Beimang to the death. Even if Beimang took over Beiliang, which retreated after the battle went badly, it would be an isolated place with scorched earth. On the contrary, it would increase the supply line of the Beimang army. Beiliang could continue to confront Beimang at the western Shu border, and could even harass Beimang in the vast western regions. However, because Chen Zhibao was conferred the title of king and entered Beiliang, he cut off the entire western regions of western Shu and Nanzhao. As a result, Su Fengnian and Beiliang had no strategic depth and could only defend to the death. Su Fengnian felt an indescribable sense of guilt deep in his heart. It could not be said that he had let down the Beiliang people, but he felt that he had let down Li Yishan. Chapter 1250. The Northern Liang army was overly optimistic about the Northern Mang royal court's internal affairs. Su Fengnian did not think that this would be able to restrain the military strength of the Northern Mang royal court. With the word advantage in front of them, this was the general trend. As long as the old woman used both kindness and power, She would be suppressed by Tuoba Bodhisattva's great army on one hand, and she would be conferred the title of Marquis on the other hand. She would be able to conquer the Central Plains. It would not take too long for her to truly unite the country and march southward. Sui Xiegu was 100 years old and had traveled to the ends of the earth. He had seen all the emperors, generals, and commoners. The affairs of the world could not stir this one-armed old man's emotions. He stood beside Su Fengnian, who was in a daze and felt a little bored. He casually asked, "When this old man was young, he did not understand why the generals and soldiers loved to fight. Were they really not afraid of death? The Spring and Autumn War was easy to understand. People in troubled times were not as good as dogs in times of peace. Life was worthless because they were forced to not take it seriously. Now that Beiliang has been at peace for a long time, can it really stop the million-strong Beimang army?" Su Fengnian calmly said, "It's simple. Give up one's home for the country and give up one's life for one's home. No one is not afraid of death. It's just that everyone knows that the Beiliang cavalry is not afraid of death. Other than the fact that the Beiliang people are naturally brave, many of them also know that they have no way out. Their home is in Beiliang. If they retreat, the border troops will disperse and the Beimang army will invade the south. Even if they escape from Beiliang, their 2 legs will not be able to outrun the 4 legs of the Beimang army." Sui Xiegu curled his lips and mocked, "None of you officials are good people." Su Fengnian laughed. "Don't I have no way out too?" Sui Xiegu rolled his eyes and said, "With your skills, if you really want to kill people, why don't you go to Dragon Waste State alone and kill them all? Don't tell me that Bodhisattva Tuoba, Hong Jingyan, and the others are following behind you every day?" Su Fengnian said indifferently, "I can kill like this, but so can the people on the Beimang martial arts ranking. When 2 countries are at war, this kind of action can't be said to be meaningless, but it really doesn't have much meaning. Of course, if one day Beiliang can no longer defend the Northwest Gate, I will definitely do so." Sui Xiegu was about to speak when he heard Tantai Pingjing snort coldly. The sword-eater old monster immediately shut his mouth. At this moment, there was a cloud of dust in the distance. Looking at the route, it seemed that they were going south. They probably saw the 3 horses on the small sand slope. These people with superb riding skills headed straight for the slope. However, they did not act blindly without thinking. Instead, they stopped 500 feet away from the bottom of the slope and looked at Su Fengnian and the other 2 on the slope. This was a Northern Mang elite scout. Judging from his armor and clothing, he wasn't the Crow Palanzi who was equally famous as Northern Liang's wandering crossbowman. He should be the vanguard under Southern Dynasty's great general Lu Gui's direct command. Lu Gui was once praised by the Beimang Empress as being half a Su Shao. He was originally one of the candidates to replace Huang Songpu as the king of the southern courtyard. However, the fatty dong that the old woman mentioned beat him to it. As a scout, regardless of whether it was from the Northern Mang or the Northern Liang, they were all very particular about the rules. Unless they encountered each other on a narrow path, collecting military intelligence under the premise that their whereabouts were not exposed was their first priority. However, if they could casually take the enemy's head, no one would refuse. A rider rushed out of the group of scouts and shot an arrow from 100 paces away. His aim was excellent. The arrow flew straight towards Su Fengnian's head, who was in the middle of the 3 riders on the slope. This barbarian probably wanted to confirm the strength of these 3 riders. If they were not to be trifled with, then he would retreat. If they were just embroidered pillows, then he would kill them and take their horses. Now that the 2 armies of Liang Mang were facing off, the scouts would be the first to exchange lives. Su Fengnian turned his head and dodged the arrow. The scout quickly turned his horse around and retreated. Sui Xiegu stared with wide eyes and asked, "You don't want to eat meat that's delivered to your mouth? Isn't mosquito meat? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Naturally, there will be top-notch Beiliang crossbowmen secretly watching us. Right now, Beimang's harassment seems very inexplicable. In order to obtain Beimang's precise motive, I have already paid an immeasurable price. The route of these Beimang scouts is the most valuable clue. As for who is the real bait, it will depend on the strength and luck of both sides." Sui Xiegu said in a carefree manner, "Bent intestines, how unpleasant." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Do you want Beimang's million-strong army to obediently gather in one place and then fight with 30 of us in one go?" Sui Xiegu asked back, "You save the trouble and he saves the trouble. Everyone will be happy. Whoever loses will scram. What else do you want?" Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. The northern barbarians really want Beiliang to do that. To be honest, I also want to do that. The old swordsman's words sounded very absurd and amateurish, but if Liang Mang could really be so decisive and leave no room for negotiation, then everyone would be happy. Northern Mang would have the hope of taking down the tiger blocking their way south, and Northern Liang would also have the hope of defeating the Northern Mang army in one fell swoop. Bei Mang's advantage was very obvious. They had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, but Beiliang's advantage was that Bei Mang's army was temporarily leaderless. Although Dong Zhuo was the commander in name, other than the 100,000-strong Dong family army, Hong Jingyan's Ruren cavalry, Dragon Waste Province's Gusai Province's 5th Army, and Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan's personal armies, he, as the king of the south, could not command them as he wished. On the other hand, Beiliang was different. Chu Lushan and Yuan Zuozong could control Beiliang's army. In a confrontation where victory would be decided in one battle, this was where Beiliang's opportunity lay. However, this kind of battle of wills that was equivalent to betting the throne of two dynasties was too extravagant for both sides. Su Fengnian looked at the Bei Mang scouts retreating north and said softly, "Half of Su Shao? No matter who wins or loses this battle, Lu Gui's 40,000 men will all die." Tan Tai Pingjing asked, "What do you say next? Go to the Governor-General house or continue north?" "Let's go take a look at Bei Mang's million-strong army." Su Fengnian urged his horse down the slope and galloped north. Sui Xiegu, who was following behind, said angrily, "Didn't you just say that such actions are meaningless?" Su Fengnian smiled and turned to look at the tall woman. He acted dumb and asked, "Senior Tan Tai, did I say that?" Tan Tai Pingjing said expressionlessly, "No." Sui Xiegu wanted to say something but stopped. He felt really uncomfortable. Su Fengnian started to hum a tune. "The king told me to patrol the mountain. After patrolling the North Mountain, I will patrol the South." He patrolled the East Mountain to kill the passers-by, and patrolled the West Mountain to watch the sun. "My king has 3 heads and 6 arms. Oh, I snatched Lil Miss and carried her on my back. I'm so pitiful that I can't swallow the fat meat in my mouth. When will I be able to become a king?" Chapter 1251. The 3rd chapter was uploaded in the wee hours of the morning, and will not be included in tomorrow's update. 2 chapters tomorrow. The Liang dynasty had 2 anomalies. One was Su Shao. Even though he had become a king with a different surname, the soldiers under him still liked to call him Great General. Another one was Gu Zhentang. Although he had not been conferred the title of king or vassal, he had been the Minister of War for more than 10 years. Most of the generals had addressed him as Great General in private. Now, he had become the only person in Liang who had a rank of first-class merit. At the border of Liao and Liao, he was still known as Great General. After the Spring and Autumn War came to an end, Gu Zhentang, whose military achievements were slightly inferior to Su Zhao's, was undoubtedly more favored by the nobles of Liang's old faction and the new nobles of the dynasty. After Su Zhao's death, the well-deserving leader of Liang's army left the capital and took charge of the entire military and politics of the northern lands. Whether it was the authority in Gu Zhentang's hands or his reputation in Liang's court, both rose sharply. Even the dullest officials in the capital knew that General Gu Zhentang, who was far from being called an old official, would become a pillar of support for 3 dynasties. It was only a matter of time. Don't forget that Gu Zhentang was also an expert who had entered the martial arts rankings. With his strong body and great energy, it would be too easy for him to last another 20 to 30 years. Therefore, the saying that border generals were envied did not apply to Gu Zhentang. After Gu Zhentang took over the Liao, the eastern front of the Liang dynasty, which had eaten up countless soldiers' salaries and silver, was said to be impregnable. Everyone in the Liao border army followed Gu Zhentang's lead. Especially before Great General Gu resigned as the Minister of War, Great Peace City had some objections to the bottomless Liao soldier salaries. After Gu Zhentang left the capital and went to the north, although Gu Lu, which had lost its backbone, started to fall apart, the court's support for the eastern Liao border army became greater and greater. Originally, the court would be hesitant about the rewards for the soldiers at the border, dragging it out and reducing it if they could. Now, it was unobstructed and not reduced. With such a general, the Liao border army had a new look and a rare morale. There were even rumors circulating in private that Great General Gu might be able to go one step further. Since Su Shao was a great general, he was. Su Shao had been a pillar of the country, and he was also one. Then, since Su Xiao was a king with a different surname, why couldn't he, Gu Zhentang, be one? Who in the world didn't know that the court was wary of Bailiang, but trusted great General Gu? The morale of the Eastern Front was high, especially after the northern barbarians brazenly split up their troops. Almost all the generals of the Tu Liao had gone to the general's tent to ask for battle. Since the northern barbarians clearly bullied the weak and feared the strong and decided to attack Bailiang first, why did they dare to challenge us with only 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers? Were they enough to fill the gaps between the teeth of our Eastern Front army? But whether it was the old subordinates who had followed Gu Zhentang during the Spring and Autumn War or the outsiders of Gu Lu who had been steadily rising in the Tu Liao, none of them were able to make the general nod. In the end, many generals were even chased out of the tent by the general, who didn't get tired of them. It was about to be winter. The Tu Liao were bitterly cold, and the coldness was bone-chilling. On the official road leading to a Wu castle, the leader of the cavalry was a man wearing a slightly old and expensive fox fur coat. Under the fox fur coat was an iron armor that was still as bright as new after many years. Behind him were 200 elite light cavalrymen, who were familiar with archery and horses. The man was no longer young. His hair was white, but at a glance, there was no trace of fatigue or lethargy on his body. One could even clearly recognize his iron-blooded temperament that was full of hard edges. It was hard to imagine that a man who was almost 50 years old and had been an official of the capital for more than 10 years still hadn't lost any of his sharpness in the officialdom. On the contrary, those 10 years of hibernation were like 10 years of sharpening a knife. The more you sharpened it, the sharper it became. It must be known that the old fur coat he was wearing had extraordinary significance. Back when the Zhao family ruled the world, the late Emperor of Liang rewarded them according to their merits. Countless civil and military officials were promoted and rewarded with wealth and mansions. However, only 3 people were bestowed with fox fur coats by the late emperor. At that time, the only civil official who received this honor was the youngest grand secretary in the history of Liang, the blue-eyed Zhang Julu. The only generals who had helped the Zhao family conquer the world with a blade and a spear were Su Xiao and him. After he gave the talisman knife Nanhua to that interesting young man, he only had the most ordinary frontier army battle knife as a pendant. However, no one dared to deny that he was the #1 expert in blade techniques in the world. Unlike the top swordsmen of Jianghu who each had their own style, the people who used the blade in the world, even those who were crowned with the title of Grandmaster, seemed to be miles apart from this person. No wonder Wu Ping said that he alone occupied half of the world's blade intent. A group of travel-worn riders entered the official road from a small path in the west. Behind the man were 2 young military officers with similar appearances. One of them frowned slightly, while the other, younger, smiled knowingly. In the entire Liao, only that girl and that madman dared to block the road like this. It couldn't be helped. One of them was their father's most beloved daughter, while the other was half a son and half a son-in-law. These 2 military officers with real power at the border were not the sons of the aristocratic families in the capital who came to Liao to gild their names. They were able to obtain their positions and military power today because of the military merits they gained from climbing through piles of corpses on the battlefield. Gu Donghai and Gu Xishan were sons of the most influential families in the Liang dynasty. However, these 2 young men had started out as ordinary soldiers. After they were promoted to military officers, even their superiors didn't know their true identities. It wasn't until they became military officers in charge of military affairs that they were able to enter the sights of the high-ranking generals of the Tu Liao. At that time, they were still the sons of the Minister of War. Only then were they recognized by the generals who were familiar with the capital's officialdom. The man and woman of the cavalry naturally rode side by side with Gu Donghai and Gu Xishan, without any sense of unfamiliarity. Gu Xishan rudely said to that guy, "Madman Yuan, you came empty-handed? You're not paying attention, kid? Aren't you afraid that your future brother-in-law won't pay attention to you?" The young swordsman called Madman Yuan grinned, revealing a mouthful of cold, snow-white teeth. He gestured with his chin at the woman beside him. "What's there to pay attention to? This time, your sister almost burned down Wild Goose Castle in Jizhou. Gu Xishan, your family sells vinegar, right? You're such a big vinegar jar. With her ruckus, the entire Liao can smell the vinegar." The woman smiled but didn't say anything. Gu Xishan laughed and said, "You should be content. If it was anyone else who dared to do this, wouldn't the man's thing be castrated to go with wine? Not to mention the women of Wild Goose Castle. Even if it was a princess or a princess, she would go up and slap them." This time, she was just giving people a hard time. You should be burning incense to thank the gods. Chapter 1252. The young man with the saber at his waist was the #1 saber in the world, Southflower Saber. He wanted to speak, but when he saw the back of the tall man, he gave up. No matter how heartless and courageous he was, he did not dare to speak ill of his future wife in front of his father-in-law. Gu Xishan stared and asked, Yuan Tingshan, did you really come empty-handed? The young man who now had more than half of the power in Jibei smiled and said, I just chopped off more than 600 heads of northern barbarians. You want them? I'll send someone to deliver them to you later. Gu Xishan was slightly envious and asked in a low voice, Yuan Tingshan, why don't I go with you to Ji province? We haven't had a war for many years. Your business seems to be booming. I can even be a military officer for you. Yuan Tingshan, who was popular in both Liao and Ji province, said disdainfully, military officer? Don't even think about it. Do you want to be a cart driver or not? Gu Xishan cursed. Gu Donghai dismissed it with a smile. He had always been amiable to Yuan Tingshan, his brother-in-law. He had never put on airs as a descendant of a famous general, nor had he shown any contempt for the lowly Jianghu people in the eyes of the top nobles. On the contrary, this time, Wild Goose Castle had recognized Yuan Tingshan as their son-in-law. Otherwise, no matter how powerful Wild Goose Castle was in Ji province, they would not dare to fight with the Gu family. Although their father had never verbally acknowledged Yuan Tingshan as his adopted son or son-in-law, he had brought Yuan Tingshan to the capital twice. This was enough to explain everything to the capital and Liao. Gu Jiantang suddenly called out to Yuan Tingshan. The latter quickly patted his horse and followed. The three siblings consciously slowed down their horses. Gu Jiantang said calmly, You sent a report to Great Peace City. Yuan Tingshan pursed his lips and did not explain anything. Gu Jiantang's tone was still emotionless. After Donghu marries you, she will no longer be part of the Gu family. Yuan Tingshan felt as if he was struck by lightning, but he still did not want to lower his head. He said in a low voice, General, don't worry. I can raise her. The corners of Gu Jiantang's mouth seemed to curve into a sneer. Yuan Tingshan pulled on the reins and abruptly stopped the horse. Other than Gu Jiantang, Gu Beihu, who had made up her mind to follow her husband, Gu Donghai and Gu Xishan, who were confused, continued to follow Gu Jiantang to Fort Wu. She asked carefully, What's wrong? Did you make my father unhappy? Yuan Tingshan grimaced, looking like he had a headache. The horseman he brought with him also stopped by the side of the road. Yuan Tingshan rubbed his chin and said, Your father is really interesting. He obviously wants to eat the 200,000 Beimang soldiers, but he wants to be a stone Buddha. Even after I handed over the booklet, it would only benefit your father, but your father still refused. I just can't figure it out. What's the point of being a pillar of the country? Gu Beihu was shocked. Wasn't that memorial to ask for merit from the Ministry of War? Yuan Tingshan tilted his head and spat. A few hundred barbarians' heads are nothing to me. I'll feel ashamed if I tell others about it. If I want to do something, I'll do something big. This time, I'm helping the Zhao Emperor kill a man. His head is worth a few 100,000 barbarians. Gu Beihu was stunned. Gu Jiantang turned his head and looked towards the south. His eyes were dark and complicated. In the imperial study of Great Peace City, the Emperor of Zhao walked to the center of the study, squatted down and used a pair of tongs to stir the charcoal in the brazier. Beside him, Song Tonglu, the head of ceremony directorate who served the emperor, bent his back and trotted over. His steps were quiet, like the steps of an agile cat, but one could see that this successor of Han Xianxia was trembling with fear. There was a memorial in the hand of the emperor of Zhao clan, and Song Tonglu knew it very well. It was sent to him by Yuan Tingshan, a popular figure in Jibei. As for what was written on the memorial, when Han Xianxia was still the head eunuch, he could read it first before deciding whether to submit it to the emperor or to the Ministry of War. But now, the imperial palace had set up an assistant eunuch, and Song Tonglu did not dare to touch it anymore. The emperor of Zhao family held the memorial and placed it on the burning charcoal. But when he lit a corner, he hesitated and pulled his hand back. He knocked on the edge of the brazier and extinguished the flame. There were 4 or 5 life attendants in the imperial study. They were all quite young, and they were still buried in their books. They did not seem to have noticed the strange scene. The charcoal fire shone on the pale face of the emperor of Zhao family. A great eunuch who was allowed to wear a bright red robe said softly outside the room, "Your Majesty, the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, Jean Lanting, requests an audience." The emperor of Zhao family's arms hung in the air. He was deep in thought, as if he did not hear the voice that was neither soft nor loud. Song Tonglu held his breath and bent down. He did not dare to speak, but he stretched one hand behind his back and waved at the open door. The great eunuch who was also bent down should not be able to see the subtle movement of the ceremony supervisor's palm seal, but he immediately moved back. The emperor of Zhao family slowly came back to his senses and said calmly, "Permission granted." Song Tonglu said softly, "Your Majesty." The emperor of Zhao family grunted in acknowledgement. Soon, Song Tonglu quietly brought in a small embroidered stool. The emperor of Zhao family sat in front of the brazier. The memorial was placed on the front lapel of his yellow dragon robe. It was placed on a beautiful dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Jean Lanting, who had a beautiful beard, stepped over the threshold and was about to kneel down when the emperor of Zhao family said softly, "You're excused." The emperor of Zhao family stretched out his hand. Song Tonglu hurriedly brought in another stool. Jean Lanting, who was flattered, carefully sat down after thanking him. The emperor of Zhao family looked at the scholar from Bailiang. The haze between his eyebrows seemed to have lightened a bit. He said pleasantly, "Third young master, do you have something to report?" Jean Lanting's expression was calm and resolute. It was as if he was possessed by a god. He looked like he was about to die. He said respectfully, "I do have something to report. I should have reported it to you, but I think I should still report it to your Majesty face to face." Jean Lanting stood up, bent down, and took a few steps back. He knelt down with all his strength and prostrated himself on the ground. He said slowly, "Your humble servant Jean Lanting wants to impeach Grand Secretary Zhang Julu for 10 major crimes." Your humble servant. Grand Secretary. In the imperial study, almost all of the emperor's personal servants trembled. The emperor of Zhao family was silent. In the eastern palace, Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan stood alone under the golden birdcage with a dumb parrot. He was whistling happily. He said to himself, his purpose is to be the world's #1 trader since ancient times. He used power to avoid it. Let me calculate, how many crimes are there? Controlling the power of the court and acting arbitrarily. Raising a border army for private reasons and squandering the national treasury. Colluding with the powerful eunuch Han Xianxia. Framing the valiant martyr Han family for personal reasons. Not doing enough to govern the country, leading to the restoration of West Chu. And I can't seem to think of anything else even after racking my brains. Speaking of this, the crown prince smiled. It's really been hard on our third young master Jean. Chapter 1253. As Beimang's army moved southward, Lioa City, which was located at the border of Dragon Waste State, became an extremely eye-catching town. After the previous city magistrate, Tao Qianji, died without reason, the new city magistrate who replaced him naturally rose in status in the imperial court. However, when he received the news in haste, he was still quite frightened. Leading a few of his personal guards, he rushed out of the city with all his might. However, at the intersection of an official road and a small winding path, he was rudely stopped. The city overseer did not complain at all, only resentfully returning to his residence. On the way back, he didn't need to rush. From time to time, he would turn his head to size up the few solemn cavalrymen. "Hey, it's Beimang's self-proclaimed second-best scout, Crow Palanzi." It's said that training a single Crow Palanzi is comparable to training 2 heavy cavalrymen in Baiting's imperial tent. Only that fatty was willing to spend so much money. Ever since Dong Zhuo was promoted, he still wore armor when he went out. Even when he went to the imperial court to see Her Majesty, he didn't wear the prominent official robe of the king of the southern courtyard. However, this time, he didn't alert any of the border armies. When he arrived near Lioa City, he changed into this robe that could be said to be second only to one person. He held the small hand of Tao Qianji's daughter, Tao Manwu, and walked to the front of the old and new graves. The old grave was quite old. Although the one lying in it had no relatives or friends, it wasn't overgrown with weeds in the past. This was because when the one lying in the new grave was alive, he would often have people pull out weeds. After he retired from the position of commandant of Chong and became the city magistrate of Lioa City, he would often visit the grave. Unfortunately, now that he was neighbors with the old guy, he was powerless even if he wanted to. Dongzhi was squatted behind him and put a pot of wine at his feet. He first quietly pulled out the yellowed weeds on the old grave and murmured, "Old Corporal, don't blame little fatty Dong. I once swore that as long as I didn't become a rank 1 high official, I wouldn't have the face to visit your grave and toast you. Today this little fatty, can be considered to have struck it rich. Your face is so bright. Why don't you grin? What? Do you finally realize that your mouth full of yellow teeth looks terrifying?" Dong Zhuo, who had outstanding military exploits, whether it was chasing or fleeing on the battlefield, even without a warhorse, his 2 legs were faster than 4 legs. However, at this time, it was particularly difficult to pull out the weeds that could be easily understood by young children. The great general and the king of the southern courtyard liked to call the empress sister, and even liked to paste spring festival couplets on people's doors. At this moment, his face was covered in tears. He then wiped his face, his tears and snot, tears and wiped. His face, tears and his nose, was unclear. "Corporal, there's a saying says, tears and his nose. His tears. And his tears and his tears and his ants. As to what I wear? The is King's Row. S was S. Old Sergeant, can you believe it?" Back then, that little fatty whose legs would go soft whenever he saw a small-scale Northern Liang cavalry, and that little fatty whom you scolded as a coward, was the most senior official among all the soldiers you brought. Dong Zhuo didn't turn his head. He just pointed at the new grave and said, "Look at that bastard Tao Chenji. He's worse than you. He didn't even die on the battlefield. He died just like that. If he's not AF * king deserter, then what is he? Corporal, can you sleep soundly with this kind of person as your neighbor? In any case I, Dong Zhuo, won't believe it even if I'm beaten to death." Dong Zhuo suddenly turned his head and roared at the new grave, "Tao Chenji, I'm scolding you. After the old corporal left, you were the first among your brothers to become a corporal, the first to become a commandant, and the first to become a general. You think these are amazing? Bull * T. The highest-ranking official in your life is the commandant general, the lousy city overseer who left behind a small city. Damn you!" Dong Zhuo smiled bitterly. "I know. You think it's shameful to be with me. That's why you're unwilling to come to the Dong army to help me. Others are just suffering because they want to save face. Look at you. You're dead, aren't you? If you have the ability to crawl out, I'll kick you back." Dong Zhuo was probably afraid that he would frighten the little girl kneeling in front of the new grave, so he restrained himself. He unscrewed the lid of the wine pot and took out 3 wine cups from his bosom. He put one on the grave of the old corporal, squeezed out a smile and said to Tao Manwu, "Little Manwu, give the cup to your father." With his alcohol addiction, he must be craving for wine after lying down for so long. The little girl took the cup with both hands. Uncle Dong poured her a cup of wine and gently sprinkled it in front of her father's grave. Dong Zhuo sprinkled a cup of wine in front of the old grave. He also raised his head and drank a cup. After pouring another cup for himself, he drank it in one gulp. Seeing little Manwu holding the cup with both hands, Dong Zhuo smiled and said, "I won't let your father drink. I'll just let him lie there and stare." The little girl's eyes were filled with tears, but she tried hard not to cry out loud. She felt wronged and sad. Dong Zhuo hurriedly poured a cup of wine for her. Seeing the child seriously sprinkle another cup of wine, Dong Zhuo's eyes became sour again. He tilted his head to look at the new grave and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, little Manwu is more of a daughter than my own daughter. As long as I conquer Beiliang if I'm still alive, I won't dare to say that I'll give the entire Central Plains to little Manwu as a dowry, but half of it won't be able to escape." Dong Zhuo turned to look at the old grave and said, "Old Corporal, are you going to say that I, little fatty Dong, am bragging again? This time, you really shouldn't look down on me. Nowadays, if I fart in the imperial court, a lot of people will say that it smells good. Hong Jingyan, Murong Bao Ding, and the rest of those awe-inspiring bastards, all had to obediently assist me. Isn't the Beiliang cavalry the best in the world? Old Corporal, you have the guts to say that you want tens of thousands of them to die this winter? If even one of them dies, I'll dig a hole next to you and bury myself. I'll be your neighbor. If you really can't say it, you can just tell me in my dreams." Tao Manwu asked for another cup of wine from Uncle Dong. After sprinkling the 3rd cup of wine,
He put down the cup and knelt in front of the grave without saying a word.
Chapter 1254. Dong Zhuo did not let her get up, nor did he console her.
He sat down on the ground and poured the remaining wine into the mud.
He said softly, "Back then, you only brought a few soldiers with you. I, Dong Zhuo, have 100,000 soldiers under my command. I also have the best crowbars in Beimang and the best foot soldiers in Beimang.
The 300,000 soldiers in the 20 or so military towns in the southernmost prefectures of Gusai and Longyao are under my command.
Hong Jingyan's Ruran cavalry and the 100,000 private soldiers of great generals like Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzan are still under my command. Further north, the two Jidushi who are holding half of the military tally, 200,000 soldiers, have also obediently handed it over to me. Once His Majesty has cleaned up the grasslands in the north, other than Tuoba, everyone else who has reached the border of the southern dynasties will also be under my command. Beiliang is not that big. With so many people and so many warhorses, just a little pea is enough to cause a flood in Beiliang. A big battle before spring, and at most a battle during the autumn hunt next year. Beiliang will be completely finished."
Dong Zhuo laughed sinisterly. "Beiliang must think that the battle will last for 3 to 5 years.
I, Dong Zhuo, have been a fox for more than 10 years. This time, I will be the alpha wolf.
I will not rest until I have eaten my fill."
Dong Zhuo grabbed a handful of mud and threw it away.
He stood up and said, "Old Dekarch, old Tao, I will take this empty wine pot with me.
When I lead the army to the southern border of Liang, I will bring back a pot of mud from there. I will let you two country bumpkins who have never even been to Beiliang see what kind of fertile soil can grow rice." Dong Zhuo stood up and looked at young man Wu who was still kneeling. He bent down and rubbed her little head. He said softly, "We should go." The little girl stood up and silently raised her arm to wipe away her tears. Dong Zhuo thought for a moment and lowered his head to look at the luxurious robe he was wearing. He took it off, folded it neatly, and placed it between the two graves.
He said indifferently, "Returning home in glory, no one will look at me."
"Then why are you still wearing it?" Dong Zhuo placed young man Wu on his shoulder and left in large strides. He smiled and said, "Young man Wu, didn't uncle give you a pony? Very soon, you will be able to cross the river with our million-strong army." Iron horses and ice rivers entered the central plains. When the news spread throughout the capital, Great Peace City was not in an uproar. Everyone was silent out of fear. It was not easy to live in the capital. However, the right chancellor of the Imperial College, Jean Lanting, who had risen to the top in just a few years, listed out the 10 major crimes and impeached none other than the founder of the Liang dynasty, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. Most of the people in the capital felt that this outsider had truly gone mad. Challenging Grand Secretary Zhang, if this wasn't throwing an egg against a rock, what was it?
During these dozen or so years, the people who wanted the Grand Secretary to lose his position could be said to have come one after another.
Every now and then, they would jump around a few times. However, most of the time, the Grand Secretary didn't even bother to give them a proper look.
Meanwhile, these people who overestimated their own abilities were all important figures who could shake the capital with a stomp of their feet, all of them deeply rooted.
However, who succeeded? Moreover, their appetites weren't that great. They only wanted that green-eyed child to take off his official robe, not daring to have this #1 civil official of Liang Imperial Court meet the late emperor.
Of the 10 great crimes, the one that everyone believed in the most was actually the one that forced the death of Ji Province's Han family.
This was indeed a secret matter passed down by the father-son-in-law Grand Secretaries. Jean Lanting used the 8 words "lantern light continues, endless salary," to describe Zhang Julu's political reform. It could be said to be incomparably accurate. Meanwhile, what was worth pondering over was the crime of colluding with the powerful official Han Xianxia, leading to a foul atmosphere in the inner and outer courts. Now that the human cat Han Xianxia was already dead, how was the Grand Secretary going to defend himself?
However, the one that carried the most destructive force was also the one that left everyone feeling the most inconceivable.
It wasn't privately raising the 2 vast border armies, but rather the last of the 10 great crimes. After ruling for more than 10 years, he opened up a large amount of salt and iron, pouring all of his energy into the northwest. When this news quickly settled down, it seemed like it quickly disappeared without a trace, but more and more people began to chew on the hidden meaning within.
Even though the Grand Secretary still participated in the court assembly every day, when he needed to stay overnight, he would definitely be on duty in the Minister province, handling all types of government affairs still in an orderly manner.
However, it wasn't strange for the Grand Secretary's residence to be completely deserted. After all, the Grand Secretary had never liked to privately meet with guests. However, the great residences on the same street as the Grand Secretary also began to be deserted, making the onlookers' imaginations run wild. More importantly, this time, Jianghu didn't strike like he did against Zhao Shushuan. Bai Yan didn't react at all to the ungrateful and mad dog biting of 3rd Jin, the right chancellor of the Imperial College. At the same time, there was one matter that had to be mentioned. That was, Yin Mao Chun, who had the title of Hidden Minister and was in charge of the evaluation of local officials this year, had quietly returned to the capital ahead of time. The Emperor and the Crown Prince paid a visit to Qi Yanglong's mansion. Huanwen claimed that he was sick and didn't participate in the court assembly. Immediately after, the sound of winter thunder rang out in Great Peace City. General Yang Xinxing, who had been caught by the West Chu rebel army and was covered in dirt, secretly went to Great Peace City to prove that the Grand Secretary Zhang Julu had framed the Han family in the past and wasn't wrong. On the day of the beginning of winter, the Emperor personally led a group of Great Peace City officials to welcome the winter in the northern suburbs. Among the nobles, other than Huan Wen, who still didn't appear, all the officials in the capital led by Zhang Julu were present. Thus, there was no morning court assembly for the beginning of winter. However, after the beginning of winter, there would be a grand court assembly. The Son of Heaven would bestow jackets to the officials, implying that he sympathized with the officials to protect them from the winter cold. On this day, Tantanon, who had gotten up early before the sun rose, sat alone in the study and stared blankly at the sky outside the window for a long time. The sky gradually brightened. The old man went to the bookshelf and took out a handwritten book that his teacher had given him. He ground the ink himself and shakily wrote a line of words on the title page of the handwritten book. He planned to have the steward of the residence send it to the Grand Secretary's residence. Winter is getting colder. Old friend, please wear more clothes. After writing, the old man started to stare blankly again. Then, an old steward of the residence stumbled into the study with a pale face. He said sorrowfully as if the sky had fallen, "Master, the Grand Secretary said in the court assembly that the 2 generations of the Su family have guarded the northwest for more than 20 years and have worked hard. Su Fengnian has inherited his father's work and is loyal. He should be made a pillar of the country. What should we do? Why did the Grand Secretary do this? Most importantly, His Majesty didn't get angry. Although he didn't agree to the pillar of the country, after the imperial edict was rejected, he once again bestowed the new Prince Liang a pillar of the country." Huanwen waved his hand expressionlessly, indicating for the old steward to leave. The study returned to silence. Huanwen gently closed the precious handwritten book that had been opened and muttered, "Old man, I can only burn it for you." Chapter 1255. There's one more chapter in the morning, not included in tomorrow's update. 2 more chapters for tomorrow. In the winter, the water outside the Great Wall dried up and the grass turned yellow. To be able to come across a little bit of tenacious greenery was exceptionally pleasing. The 3 of them stopped their horses by the bank of a water source. If they rode straight north for 3 days, they would be able to see the tiled city. Su Fengnian squatted down, scooped up a handful of water and splashed it on his face. He exhaled deeply. Sui Xiegu, who was not familiar with military affairs, asked casually, "Are these northern barbarians out of their minds? Why don't they station their troops at the border in early autumn? Didn't these nomadic barbarians, who lived on horseback, invade the central plains in autumn to plunder the harvest? What's the point of plundering in winter?" Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. Tan Taiping explained calmly, "What you're saying is the general situation. In the past, the nomadic tribes brought great damage to the central plains. Most of them came south in winter, taking advantage of the frozen river to allow the cavalry to pass unimpeded. At the end of the Dafeng dynasty, the northern barbarians used this opportunity to invade the central plains." Su Fengnian continued, "The relationship between the grassland nomads and the central plains farming dynasties is like that of a wolf and a tiger. The latter always has the initiative. Whenever the latter is in a state of exhaustion due to the alternation between prosperity and decline, they are like a young tiger, a sick tiger, or a tiger that is about to die of old age. That's when the northern barbarians are at their strongest. Therefore, every time there is a civil war in the central plains, the northern barbarians will invade the border and take advantage of the situation. But in the end, from the Great Qin to Liang, It was the Central Plains dynasties that suppressed the northern barbarians. You have to know that the official history of the Great Qin recorded that 5 barbarians were equal to 1 Qin soldier. The official history of the Dafeng dynasty also said that the barbarians were skilled in Qin, but 3 of them were equal to 1 Dafeng soldier. That is to say, even if the northern nomads had obtained many forging techniques from the Great Qin dynasty, 3 of them were only equal to 1 Dafeng soldier. But today, Beimang relies on the southern dynasty that has absorbed countless people from the spring and autumn period. In the Central Plains, only the elite troops of Zhao Yi, the prince of Guangling, and Zhao Bing, the prince of Yanqi, dare to claim to be equal to the Beimang. Sui Xiegu could not help but ask, is the Liang dynasty not strong enough to unify the Central Plains? Didn't they say that Liang was as powerful as the Great Qin? Su Fengnian laughed and said, if the current emperor had not been in a hurry to show the world his great talent and strategy when he first ascended to the throne, and had not fought those wars with Beimang, and had instead calmly digested the strength of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn, then it would not have mattered at all whether our Beimang had 300,000 soldiers or not. At most, it would have been the icing on the cake. Sui Xiegu glared and said, is that Emperor Zhao's brain flooded with water? At that time, there were no strategists to dissuade him? Su Fengnian said helplessly, at that time, the odds between Liang and Beimang were 50 to 50. Who would dare to carelessly persuade them? What's more, the Zhao family's son of heaven wanted to rely on his military exploits to suppress a large number of famous generals, led by my father and Gu Zhentang. In this world, how can there be such a clear distinction between right and wrong between people and matters? Take me for example. I am Su Zhao's son. In my eyes, Su Xiao is naturally a king of a different surname who did not commit any major crimes but had countless great achievements. In the eyes of Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan and the other princes, the current emperor must be the most diligent and caring emperor in the history of Liang. Back then, when Zhao Kai wanted to kill me at the Marsh of Reeds, I also wanted to go to Iron Gate Pass to kill him. Between the two of us, neither of us is a person who has committed the most heinous crimes. It's just that there's no other way. At that time, we were both chess pieces, pawns that were pushed across the river. Sui Xiegu mocked. Oh, from your tone, it seems like you've turned into a chess player today? Su Fengnian smiled and did not reply to old ancestor Qi Jian's sarcasm. He stood up and looked towards the north. On the line there was the military town of Huazhujun, Shijing, Golden Toad State, and further north was the Beimang royal court. Tantai Pingjing, who was dressed in the white robes of a Qi refinement warrior, suddenly said, to the nomadic tribes, isn't a strong and stable Central Plains dynasty also a disaster? Once the ruler of this dynasty admires Bian Gong, he will be surrounded by a group of talented generals who hope to spread their whips across the desert. The reverse is also true. Even if the Liang dynasty is destroyed and the monarch with the surname changes one after another, the battle between the nomadic tribes and the farming dynasty will not change. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, yes. Tantai Pingjing was in disbelief. Yes? Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and pointed to the north. As long as we can conquer this land, we can then build several great Qin roads that run through Beimang. Tantai Pingjing's face was full of disbelief. Are you crazy? Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and said softly, I am not crazy. If one were to talk about crazy, then that would be the young Grand Secretary who was in charge of the country at that time. Back then, Su Xiao and Gu Zhentang argued endlessly about who to choose to guard the northwest gate. On the surface, both Grand Secretaries resolutely opposed my father being the ruler of a different surname. However, I only learned of an inside story much later. Among the opposition, someone convinced the old Grand Secretary who had retired from his official position and returned to his hometown but still retained his authority. This person was Zhang Julu. Because this civil official who had never joined the army had an ambition that all military generals could not imagine. The young Grand Secretary wanted to use Beiliang as the outpost to attack Beimang, and use the Beiliang cavalry as the main force to attack Beimang. This would reduce the loss of military strength and supply pressure of Liang as much as possible. Under this premise, Grand Secretary Zhang would have the imperial court acquiesce to the Su family's limited infiltration of Shishu and Nanzhao. Chapter 1256. Su Fengnian slowly said, in a situation where this young Grand Secretary and Beiliang both sides are well aware of, there are many things that cannot be resisted. Among them, the Han family that is filled with martyrs is too stubborn and conservative, also not wishing to use their entire family's foundation as a wedding dress for Beiliang's Su family. Once they compromise,
the Han family's status as the northern military's mainstay will disappear. Then the Han family that has fought against the northern nomads for generations will also quickly become a thing of the past. You have to understand that when the Su family died, the Han family's head was still drinking and chatting merrily with my father, these two close friends. If I remember correctly, the first matchmaker I met wasn't that prince consort, but rather a little girl from the Han family who still had goat horns. She was behind her father, half of her face exposed, making a face at me.
Su Fengnian's hands withdrew into his sleeves.
At first, things didn't fall apart. The Han family also put in a lot of effort. Then, Yuan Benshi stuck his foot in, viciously dealing with Zhang Julu. By the time my father mobilized the armored cavalry, crossed the border to rescue the Han family children, everything was already too late.
Su Fengnian looked towards the sky.
When I was young, I would often dream of that goat-horned girl, half of her face covered in blood, always crying, telling me that it hurt.
Su Fengnian said in self-mockery, "In the past, I was most afraid of having nightmares about her.
Later on, when I wanted to dream about her again, there was already no way."
Su Fengnian's waist bent slightly, as if he couldn't bear the burden, but also as if he remembered someone.
"When I was young, I didn't understand anything, saying a lot of things out of anger. I even said something to Su Zhao's face, roughly saying that I became Su Zhao's son, that it was 8 lifetimes of bad luck, that I was like this, that my mother was also like this.
When I grew up, only then did I realize that Su Xiao actually already couldn't have done any better. Everything he could give me, as a father, he already gave me. He always talked about how high-spirited he had been when he was young, how many victories he had won and how much glory he had enjoyed. At that time, I always didn't have the patience to listen to him talk about these old and rotten grains. When I got impatient, I would say, "Su Xiao, a real man doesn't boast about his past achievements. Let's not blabber on and on, okay?" All the smart people in the world laughed at Su Xiao for being a fool. He helped the late emperor conquer the world, but in the end, he had to guard against his son like he was guarding against a thief for 20 years. In fact, everyone was well aware that Su Xiao would not rebel. If he wanted to rebel, the Central Plains would have long been divided into 2 rivers. But the more this was the case, the more Li Yong would take a yard after taking an inch. That was why the Zhao clan's son of heaven had Zhao Kai take the bottle to the western regions, had Chen Jibao cut off Bailiang's path of retreat, and forced the Su family's 300,000 cavalry to fight Bei Mang to the death. The Zhao clan's son of heaven used this method to help his son wear the dragon robe. In Zhao Zhuan's court, among his officials, there would be no martial artist Su Xiao whose achievements shook the emperor. There would be no scholar Zhang Julu who cared about the people of the world. Within his territory, there would be no border officials who couldn't get rid of him. There would be no vassals who coveted the dragon throne. There would only be a severely weakened Bei Mang left behind for his son to complete the great undertaking that the Great Qin and Great Feng dynasties couldn't accomplish. Su Xiao once said that the current son of heaven's magnanimity was far inferior to the late emperor, but he could be considered a good emperor. As Su Fengnian spoke, he squatted down and grabbed a handful of yellow sand, holding it tightly in his hand. Sui Xiegu sighed softly. Tantai Pingjing suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. There were a dozen or so riders approaching. Their armor was stained with blood, and their weapons and crossbows were broken. Su Fengnian stood up. When the dozen or so riders who originally wanted to use this precious water source to quickly replenish themselves saw the 3 people, they seemed to be conflicted. If there was no water, they and their warhorses wouldn't be able to withstand the pursuit of the enemy's black fox bars from several li away. The rider at the front waved his hand and charged towards the water source. The exhausted 14 riders dismounted from their horses. When they were filling their bags with water and the warhorses were brushing their noses, there were people carefully watching Su Fengnian and the other 2 in case anything unexpected happened. This place was already far away from the Bailiang border of the southern dynasty. The probability of encountering their own people was about the same as encountering the northern barbarians in Bailiang territory. These 14 riders were all elite riders with light armor and light crossbows. They were all tall and sturdy, and their horsemanship was exquisite. They also had the latest generation of cold blades at their waists. It could be seen that they were the best crossbowmen in the Bailiang frontier army. However, this time, they had probably encountered an enemy force of at least 100 riders. All of them were injured. One of the warhorses had reached the water source and swayed a few times before dying on the spot. The rider held back his tears and didn't look at his beloved warhorse. Without a word, The two riders beside him exchanged for a less damaged crossbow for him.
This crossbowman who had lost his mount and was destined not to return to the border alive was even less likely to return on the same horse as his comrades. That would only cause the death of another comrade.
This rider carried the light crossbow on his back and touched the cold blade at his waist. He grinned at the other crossbowmen and then turned to face the black fox bars that were pursuing them and intercepting military intelligence.
At this moment, the leader of the crossbowmen, who had already mounted his horse, saw the young man with an extraordinary bearing.
He smiled and said, "I'll give you 3 horses in exchange for a cold blade. How about it?" The man who looked like the leader of the crossbowmen was taken aback. He asked, "You're also from Liangzhou?" Su Fengnian nodded. "I'm a native of Liangzhou."
The leader of the crossbowmen quickly said, "If that's the case, I can lend you my cold blade.
However, I hope that young master can come find me at Wolf Ceiling Pass later. My name is Zhu Gang. This time, my brothers and I owe you our lives. Young master's steeds are all priceless. Even if we sold everything we had, we still wouldn't be able to afford them. Zhu Gang definitely won't be able to repay this favor in this lifetime. Zhu Gang isn't a hypocritical person.
I only dare say that in the future, I'll kill 30 more northern barbarian bars for young master."
Zhu Gang turned to the rider who had clearly gone to his death. "Li Tingji, get back here. Get on my horse and return to Wolf Ceiling Pass with me." Su Fengnian gave the 3 horses to Zhu Gang. When he handed over the reins, he said something that Zhu Gang didn't understand. However, he didn't have the time to think about it. 1 crossbowman for 50 riders. I owe you 36 lives. The 14 riders cupped their fists in thanks. Zhu Gang didn't forget to remind him, "Young master, be careful. There are 60 Black Fox barbarians and 300 Beimang light cavalry about 2 li behind us." Su Fengnian nodded. After the 14 crossbowmen were far away, he looked at the 2 battered warhorses. He turned to Tantai Pingjing and Xianxia Gu and said, "I'll have to trouble the 2 seniors to send these 2 horses to Wolf Ceiling Pass.
Then, wait for me at the Governor General's residence."
Xianxia Gu was about to speak when he saw Tantai Pingjing's cold glare. He could only swallow his words. Su Fengnian's right hand held the borrowed Bailiang blade and slowly walked forward. His left hand, which had been holding a handful of sand, loosened its fingers. Yellow sand scattered into the air. He slowly walked towards the 300 riders. Next spring, the loquat tree in a small courtyard would sprout new buds and bloom new flowers. The next spring would be the same. However, he didn't know if he would be able to see it with his own eyes. Chapter 1257. During the wars of the spring and autumn period, scouts were the sharpest antennae of an army. They were rarely deployed on such a large scale. However, on the border of Liangmang, it was the exact opposite. Scouts rarely went out alone to capture military intelligence. The reason was very simple. Both sides were at the peak of the use of scouts.
Whether it was the degree of importance or the speed of attrition, it far exceeded that of the Central Plains.
It had reached a level that the generals of the Central Plains found exaggerated. Once the 2 sides met, it often meant that one side was destined to be completely wiped out. When both sides had roughly the same level of individual combat and tacit cooperation, the number of people would determine who could leave the battlefield with important military intelligence. Northern Liang border army's wandering crossbowmen shook the world under the heavens, while Northern Mang wasn't inferior in any way. Dongzhua's crowbar, Huang Songpu's roaming scout personally created in the past, as well as the Black Fox Bar who was known as the son of great General Lu Gu, were all the most outstanding scouts of the present age. Crossbowman Captain Zhu Gang led 50 cavalry deep into the heart of the desert. It was not only luck but also strength. After deducing a spy report through observation, he was intercepted and killed by Heihu Lanzi on his way back. Then, not only did the second Lanzi quickly join in the pursuit, Lu Gue, one of the commanders of the border army of the southern dynasties, received the report and did not hesitate to mobilize 300 light cavalry nearby. He was determined to catch this fish that had escaped the net. The cold wind whistled and the war flag fluttered. In a heavily guarded military tent, General Lu Gue's brows were tightly furrowed. He squatted beside a pot that was about to boil. During this period of time, he rarely looked at the map of the Bailiang border that countless spies had sacrificed their lives for. It was not that Lu Gue's power had fallen, nor was it that this famous general did not value the Bailiang cavalry.
It was that even he, as the commander of the border, did not know where his side was going to focus on until 3 days ago. He did not know which unlucky place in the 3 northern provinces of Bailiang would be the breakthrough point for the army. Although the Murong and Yelu families were busy with their own affairs due to the turmoil in the grassland in their backyard, as one of the 2 pillars of the southern dynasties, the old Longguan aristocrats had always been at odds with the new military nobles represented by Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan. This time, they even jumped and cursed in the imperial court of the western dynasties and attacked together, begging the emperor to take back Dongzhu's military power. Huang Songpu had already retired and returned to his hometown, but he was almost dragged out and whipped by these angry Chinese tycoons. It could be seen how chaotic the southern dynasties was at the moment. The key was that General Dong Zhuo had been hiding all this time, as if he was determined to let the army of nearly 1 million consume their provisions in vain. Even if Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan wanted to say a few words for him, they could not. Instead, they would only add fuel to the fire. Lu Gui was temporarily in charge of the border defense military affairs of all the military towns in Gusai province. During wartime, even the prefect of discipline who had the same rank as him had to listen to him. This was a special case that had never happened in the history of Beimang. This was also a great privilege that the emperor had given to General Dong Zhuo. It should be noted that Beimang was different from Liang and the Central Plains. The prefect of discipline who controlled the mighty army was definitely not an administrator or a provincial governor. Thinking of this, Lu Gui had already smelled the unique aroma of brick tea, goat milk, and butter tea leaves mixed together. Lifting the lid of the pot, this general who used to be from a noble family in the Central Plains was in a good mood. He grabbed a handful of salt and threw it into the pot. Different from General Yang Yuanzhan who used to be a slave, and also different from Huang Songpu who had a glorious ancestor, Lu Gui's family was not in the upper class among the remnants of the northbound tribes. However, after arriving in the southern dynasties of Beimang, they would not be wantonly slaughtered like pigs or dogs. Lu Gui's status today was attributed to his hard study in the old country when he was young. It was also attributed to the military strategies he had read in those books. Because of him, Lu Gui's family had a second spring in Beimang. He was also worthy of the name of the resurgence of the family tree. However, after Lu Gui became famous, he was not like many of the remnants of the spring and autumn period who were nostalgic for the past or the extravagant nobles of Beimang who never drank the famous tea from the Central Plains. After arriving in Beimang, Lu Gui fell in love with the milk tea in the pot in front of him. He liked the strong fishy smell of goat milk and horse milk. After scooping a bowl of tea, Lu Gui put it to his nose and sniffed it. He held the bowl with one hand and slowly turned it. The descendants of his family seemed to be drinking a famous tea from the spring god lake. They did not hesitate to spend a lot of money. There were even young people who said that after conquering the Central Plains, they must have their own tea plantation on the island of the spring god lake. The general laughed. These children did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Did they really think the Central Plains was made of paper? Even if the Central Plains were easy to bully, how could they cross the threshold of Beimang? He was afraid that when the time came, Beimang would have to break a leg to cross it. Next, in the south, there was Chen Zhibao, who was sitting on a natural stronghold. This person used troops to turn something rotten into something magical. If he had 30,000 soldiers, he would be able to fight 100,000 strong soldiers. Moreover, on the eastern front, there was also the famous general of the spring and autumn period, Gu Zhentang. This time, the Guangling Road's internal strife had left the eastern front completely unscathed. Lu Gui stopped turning the teacup and said to himself, in the end, the true enemies of Beimang's million-strong army are 3 people: Su Fengnian, Chen Zhibao, and Gu Zhentang. Which one of them is easy to deal with? Lu Gui drank a mouthful of tea. When it was bland, he threw in some salt and called out, Lin Fu. A resolute general who had been waiting outside the tent lifted the curtain and walked in. Lu Gui raised the teacup in his hand. Want a cup? I might not be in the mood in the future. The middle-aged general shook his head. Lu Gui did not force him. This fellow was his trusted aide and was once the main general of the Black Fox Guard. Later, Lu Gui felt that it was a waste of talent and gave him 2 options. He could either become a third-rank general with real power in his own army and continue his military career, or he could go to the Xijing Ministry of War as an assistant minister and live a peaceful life as an official. In the end, this fellow chose neither and insisted on being an ordinary guard. Lu Gui sighed in his heart. This man had seen life and death countless times.
Why couldn't he let go of the meaningless word, love? My daughter is already married and I have a basket full of children.
What's the use of you, Lin Fu, staying by this old man's side? However, Lu Gui, who had never been sentimental, knew that these words were too hurtful and could not be said out loud.
Lu Gui asked, what about the Bailiang crossbowmen? Lin Fu said in a low voice, don't worry, they won't be able to escape back to Bailiang. Moreover, even if they are lucky enough to find something, they will only think that our army is moving out to attack Liuzhou.
Lu Gui raised his head, his expression solemn.
He seemed to have lost his previous amiability, but he also did not deliberately reveal his power. Chapter 1258. However, Lin Fu was instantly covered in sweat.
He lowered his head and said, General, apart from the Black Fox Guards and 300 personal cavalry, I also asked for a master expert from the spiderweb spies.
There is also news that the daughter of Jade Cicada Prefecture's governor, Princess Hong Hu, has followed.
Lu Gui nodded and stared at this fellow.
Luckily, you didn't drink that cup of tea. Otherwise, I would have whipped you 10 times. Lin Fu, who was famous as one of the young generals in the South Dynasty, smiled awkwardly. He was like a child who had made a mistake and was almost beaten by Mr. Strict. Lu Gui drank a mouthful of strong tea and said softly, as a general, perhaps a single wrong decision can cause many people to die. Lin Fu, do you know why the king of Bailiang doesn't care when people call him a butcher? Do you know what he feels guilty about? Lin Fu shook his head. I can't guess what the king of Bailiang is thinking. Lu Gui said softly, butcher is a title for killing millions of enemies. As a leader, being called that doesn't hurt at all. It's about the same as me whipping you 10 times.
But if because of his own carelessness, he caused the death of the soldiers under his command who should have been able to survive, that would be unsettling.
Lin Fu said softly, General, I'm just a small personal guard.
You can say that to Fatty Dong of the King of the North Court.
Lu Gui was both angry and amused. He said helplessly, I know you guys don't like Dong Zhuo. However, he does have true ability. In the future, you bunch of brats should stop talking so weirdly. Scram. Lin Fu left the tent. Behind him came Lu Gui's orders. Send my orders. The commander's tent will move south and follow the army to Lu Prefecture.
Lin Fu turned around and asked, General, you're not going to finish that pot of tea?
Lu Gui asked calmly, then how many heads do my Lu brothers have to cut off? Without another word, Lin Fu ran off to pass down the order.
As he ran, he shouted, Great General, from now on, I won't be a personal god anymore.
Last time, we agreed that I would be a third-grade general. Other than the 20,000 soldiers, the Black Fox Pen would also be under my command. If you don't say anything, I'll take it as a silent agreement. Lu Gui smiled and took the opportunity to drink another bowl of tea. Because within a month, there were people from all walks of life who left their original stations and rushed to the border of the two prefectures. After they arrived, the Ministry of War in Xijing did nothing for a long time, and complaints were heard everywhere. As a result, 3 days ago, Dong Zhuo, the king of the South Courtyard, finally began to take action. Moreover, once he took action, it was dazzling. Even Lu Gui was surprised. The personal troops of border commander Lu Gui set out to kill their way to Liuzhou. The coquettish woman, who treated this bloody pursuit as a chance to relax, stood on a high slope and raised her eyebrows. Beside her stood an old man in a brocade robe with an outstanding bearing. His nickname was the Dragon King. Beimang's devil was ranked 9th, but the Jianghu of Beimang acknowledged that this old man's ranking was too low. The noble woman of Beimang with a mink forehead was even more convinced. An old man who even the 6 great officials of the spiderweb had to respectfully address as martial uncle was ranked 9th? What a joke! She was the famous Princess Hong Yan of Beimang's royal court. She was said to have countless male companions. Her father was the governor of Jade Cicada Prefecture, but he was punished by the emperor because of a slip of the tongue. She seemed to be the most aggrieved of the 8 governors, but she was still one of the most favored descendants of the Murong Empress. When she was still a little girl, she followed her father to the capital to meet the emperor. The empress, whose hands had not been washed clean of the blood of the yellow dragons, would smile as she held Princess Hong Yan in her arms and let the child stand on her knees. That scene was unforgettable to many of the elders of the Yelu and Murong royal families. It was only at that time that people remembered that the woman was a woman. This infamous proud daughter of heaven had once personally gone to Liao City to pass a message to the city magistrate,
Tao Qianji, it's not appropriate to go out during the Qingming festival. However, Tao Qianji did not listen and died in the heavy rain of the Qingming festival. She looked at the confrontation in the distance with a great disparity in numbers and asked, "Old Dragon King, why does that figure look so familiar?" The old man in brocade clothes smiled. "Just by looking at his figure, he looks a bit like that handsome young man who was teased by the princess on the streets of Tuma Pass." The mink-forehead Princess Hongyan laughed. "I remember now. He does look a bit like that guy. I even smacked his butt." In the distance, the lone man with the saber did not show any signs of dodging. He just went straight for the charging Black Fox Lanzi and the 200 light cavalry. The old man in brocade clothes narrowed his eyes. But just by looking at his aura, it's like the difference between heaven and earth. If the princess doesn't think that this old servant's eyesight is bad, we should turn around and leave as far as we can. Princess Hongyan was shocked. That guy is a profound finger realm expert at such a young age? But even if his profound finger realm is healed, he might not be able to escape from you and 400 cavalry. Princess Hongyan asked, "Tianxiang? Is there such a person in Bailiang? Yuan Baixiong is younger and older than him. He doesn't have the leisure to come here for a stroll." The old man in brocade clothes shook his head. "If I'm not wrong, it's that guy." Then the old man turned around and left. However, Princess Hongyan did not move because she knew who the old Dragon King was talking about was. She did not want to leave even more. The old man stopped and said with a frown, "Princess, you will really die. That person has already discovered us. This old servant's leaving is just doing my best and leaving the rest to fate. This will let that person know that we have no intention of interfering." With her back to the Dragon King, the mink-forehead woman waved her hand with a smile. "Old Dragon King, you go. I have to see this legendary person with my own eyes. I have to confirm. If he is really that young master I took advantage of back then, I will have profited even if I die here today. Also, old Dragon King, don't even think about knocking me out." The old man sighed. If Princess Hongyan was determined not to leave, there was no point in him leaving. He did have the thought of knocking her out just now. She muttered, "A good show is about to begin. Old Dragon King, do you really not want to see this person's elegance with your own eyes? Perhaps if you miss it once, you will miss it forever." The old man did not say anything. He had already arrived beside Princess Hongyan and looked into the distance together. There were more than 70 Black Fox Guards and 300 Iron Guards of the Lu army. In the eyes of this cavalry, this ant blocking their path would be killed in a single charge. Their real mission was to intercept and kill the 14 crossbowmen. Su Fengnian had been holding his blade with his left hand all this time. He did not draw his blade with his right hand. He stopped, flicked his wrist. The cold blade in his left hand was unsheathed. The scabbard stabbed into the sand beside him. His left hand held the blade in a reverse grip. Chapter 1259. Looking at the scene on the other side of the narrow path, the old man in embroidered clothes asked, "Princess, are you not afraid of death?" The mink-forehead woman was clear-minded and said, "Let's go." The Baimang spiderweb elder grabbed her by the shoulder and flew down the slope. They didn't stop until they were 200 feet away from the point of collision. Along the way, Princess Hongyan still had the mood to turn her head and admire the charging posture of those northern Mang cavalrymen. Their vigorous bodies rose and fell along with the horse's back, just like a person's breathing. It was filled with a kind of dynamic beauty that was pleasing to the eye. The curved blades in the hands of the Baimang soldiers had a larger arc than the cold blades. This kind of arc gave the Baimang war blades a greater cleaving force. Combined with their height and their innate strength that exceeded that of the men of the Central Plains, a single cleave of their blades was like a hot knife through butter. Princess Hongyan heard the rough shouts of the Baimang men. She firmly believed that this kind of sound would resound throughout the Central Plains. It wasn't something that a master of the martial arts role could block, nor was it something that the 300,000 soldiers of Baimang could block. She stroked the mink forehead and looked into the distance with narrowed eyes. She saw that the person blocking the path of the millions of soldiers of the Baimang dynasty held the cold blade in a reverse grip and held it horizontally in front of his chest. A crack seemed to have appeared at the height of the horse's chest among the 3 black fox riders in the front row, which then expanded in an instant. The war horses and riders continued to charge forward, but they were cut in two. The lower half of the war horse and the rider's legs fell to the yellow sand, while the upper half of the warhorse and the rider whose legs had been cut in an instant fell to the ground further ahead.
It wasn't just the front row.
The dozen or so rows behind them were also in a similar situation. On the path 100 steps in front of the machete man, a large patch of blood instantly bloomed. Half of a warhorse's body, with its stomach exposed, slid forward while sticking to the sand. Behind the corpse of the warhorse was a ghastly bloody path. After the 30 or so riders whose legs had been cut off fell to the ground, they let out heart-wrenching cries. The invisible line was not at the end of its flight. In fact, it was still advancing rapidly. However, the Beimang cavalry behind it, especially the Black Fox Lanzi, sensed that something was wrong and leaped up high, abandoning their horses and drawing their swords. There were even knights who suddenly pulled the reins and jumped over the line that was cutting across. The knights at the back began to quickly deviate from a straight line and tried their best to make a large arc to evade the attack.
Princess Hongyan asked excitedly, "Gang Qi?" The old Dragon King nodded. She asked again, "How long and wide is the limit?"
The embroidered-robed elder shifted his gaze to the rear of the cavalry and replied, "This blade is about 300 meters long and 6 meters wide."
"But that's all it took." She clicked her tongue and said, "Wouldn't it be very impressive on the battlefield?" The old man said calmly, "On a large battlefield, there are hidden death warriors like Spider Web, who only target the experts of Jianghu. Moreover, there are also archers, foot crossbows, and even catapults. If ordinary experts dared to play like this, they would be the first living target to die. Of course, this person in front of us is an exception. If he really wants to fight to the death like the Sword Emperor of Shishu, I'm afraid he would need a few top experts to pin him down. Taking a step back, when such an expert's chi is exhausted to the point of exhaustion, he can still leave whenever he wants. No one can stop him. After all, it's just a matter of taking a breath. With such a breath, unless one is also an expert in martial arts, one would not be able to seize this fleeting opportunity. However, everything in this world has its vanquisher. If this person dares to charge into the enemy's formation, our god of war would naturally not mind taking his head personally. Most of the people who are a match for 10,000 men in the army are short-lived. After proving that they have the strength, they die." Princess Hongyan nodded in agreement and said, "This is also the reason why the experts of Jianghu are unwilling to participate in the killing on the battlefield. It's too depressing to die just like that. If they reincarnate in their next life, it's hard to guarantee that they will be reincarnated into a good body." That person seemed to raise his arm and lightly swipe the blade a few times. 6 or 7 Black Fox Lanzi on the road who jumped off their horses exploded into pieces in the air. Following his backhanded blade movements, the range of his movements was extremely small. A warhorse that had jumped high in the air had yet to step on the ground when an invisible line ran from the left side of the horse's abdomen to the right shoulder of the rider on the horse's back. It was cut into 2 halves. Another large splash of blood spilled onto the ground. A rider who was drawing his bow and shooting an arrow had his head split apart along with his horse's head. Between the swordsmen and the 300 riders, there was already a large pool of blood. Then, this pool of blood continued to move forward rapidly as the swordsman continued to raise his hand. These armored riders were easily cut apart like tofu by the blade. Princess Hongyan said with a face full of regret, "They're just ants." The old Dragon King, who had no sympathy for this tragedy, said calmly, "It's true that they're ants. However, the reason why it's so miserable is because there are too few of them. As long as the ants gather into an uncountable number of ants, then not only the West Shu Sword Emperor will be bitten to death." The old man continued, "There are masters in Beiliang who can single-handedly decide the battle of 10,000 men. However, there are only a few of them. This one, Yuan Zuozong, and Su Yanbing." Yuan Zuozong was the commander of the cavalry. When the situation reached a critical point where he had to save the situation, it meant that the entire northern Liang border army was almost finished. That spear immortal Wang Xiu's junior apprentice brother is most likely to appear in the early stages of the battle. No one would be willing to leave such a sharp spear in the armory without drinking blood. Princess Hongyan nodded. "That's right. If it's his turn, the king of Beiliang has to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Not to mention the Beiliang frontier army. I'm afraid that the 4 states of Beiliang will be ours." She suddenly laughed happily. "Old Dragon King, he's temporarily holding the title of #1 in the world. However, no matter how powerful he is, he can only watch the 300,000 soldiers of the Su family die one by one. Does he feel helpless?" The old man thought for a while and laughed. "If I were him,
I would have run away long ago. The world is vast. Where can't I go?
Where can't I be free? Chapter 1260.
She asked curiously, since killing at the border is the same, why doesn't this person just sneak into our palace and start a massacre? Isn't it quite good at disturbing the morale of the army? The old Dragon King didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her naive thoughts. He sighed and said, after reaching the celestial state, it's easy for experts to sense each other. Even if he can kill 1 or 2 cities, even if the entire Aquarius state bleeds for thousands of miles, then what? Would he be besieged and killed by masters like Tuoba, Hong Jingyan and Jian Qianjin? Princess Hongyan curled her lips and said, why are you still so restrained after becoming an invincible expert?
How boring.
In the past, I've only heard that the half-saints of the celestial state of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism didn't dare to kill easily because they were afraid of being tainted by karma. It turns out that these pure martial artists aren't much better. The old man's face was bitter and he said some words of conscience. I have no choice but to wait for death here with you, princess.
Isn't that even more boring?
The old man looked at the sky for no reason and sighed. Between the heavens and the earth, with the heavens and the earth, who isn't a puppet with their hands and feet tied? There are people who are lucky enough to jump out of this cage, but there's definitely no one who can break it. Princess Hongyan was surprised. It's over?
The thunder is loud, but the rain is too light. I haven't had enough fun watching it.
While they were talking, the knight of Beimang didn't disappoint this noble surnamed Yelu. When the less than 300 riders all stopped their horses, that person also stopped his blade. A famous archer in the Lu battalion seized this perfect opportunity to draw his bow into a full moon. The bowstring released a loud bang and shot an arrow at the young swordsman. The other 2 burly knights with big bows on their backs followed suit. They didn't need to deliberately prepare their arrows. Instead, they drew their bows and shot out an arrow in one go. 3 sharp arrows pierced through the air, the arrowheads all aimed accurately at the swordsman's face. What happened next left these seasoned elites flabbergasted. The 3 arrows hovered quietly in the air, maintaining their slanting postures. The saberman sheathed the cold saber that the Beimang border army hated the most. 1 eagle feather arrow and 2 ordinary feather arrows. He reached out to grab the eagle plume arrow, which was known in the Central Plains as faster than a hawk and unable to be shaken by a strong wind, and threw it out with a backhand. The archer, who had subconsciously grabbed the reins after shooting the arrow, had his head pierced through by the arrow. His entire body was pulled back by the huge force. His hands pulled the reins, and the warhorse raised its front hooves. The knight's corpse fell off the horse. The warhorse that had been with the dead knight day and night still seemed to be in a daze. It stepped lightly on its fine hooves, turned around, and used its nose to touch its master who had fallen to the ground. A black fox that looked like a leader turned around and looked at the northern sky with great nostalgia. After turning his head again, he faced the young expert with terrifying strength. This Lanzi suddenly squeezed his horse's belly and took the lead in a crazy charge that was tantamount to suicide. The second warhorse began to follow, then the third, the fourth. In the end, none of the riders in the entire cavalry turned around and retreated. All of them began to charge. Seeing this tragic scene, Princess Hongyan bit her lip and said softly, "Let's go." The old man was puzzled, but he did not hesitate. He grabbed her shoulder and retreated. She closed her eyes and felt the strong wind blow past her ears. She said, "If we allow the news of them dying here for no reason to spread back to the grasslands, then their deaths will be in vain." The old Dragon King did not say anything. Nearly 400 riders had chased down 14 riders, but they had not succeeded. If they allowed the enemy crossbowmen to send back information, even if these Beimang warriors had all died in battle, their parents, wives, children, and even their entire tribes on the grasslands would be implicated. And these people were originally waiting for their families to return home with military merits and food. Even if they returned empty-handed, it was good that they were alive. After allowing the 2 big fish to leave, Su Fengnian helped the 14 crossbowmen cover the retreat. He hung the cold saber at his waist and faced the aggressive Beimang cavalry. He began to run. The leader of the Black Fox fence was the first to reach him. Su Fengnian jumped up. The leader was still in the posture of raising his arm and slashing his saber. He slapped the man's head with his palm. Both the man and his horse were smashed into the yellow sand. The warhorse's abdomen was stuck to the sandpit. However, Su Fengnian had a head in his hand. He pulled it out and threw it at the second Black Fox fence.
The fence's chest was blown apart. Su Fengnian quickly fell to the ground. With a shake, his shoulders hit the sides of the warhorses on both sides. The horses' hooves left the ground, and the two riders fell to the side. One of the riders charged forward fiercely. However, when it was about 10 feet away from Su Fengnian, the rider and the horse were crushed by the majestic qi, bursting into a cloud of bloody mist. The spider-web spy hidden between the Black Fox fence and the elite Lu cavalry broke through the bloody mist without warning. The tip of his sword pointed directly at Su Fengnian's forehead. Su Fengnian completely ignored the tip of the sword. He stretched out his hand and pressed down on the head of the spy. Then, he slammed the spy to the ground. The tip of the sword shattered, and the blade snapped. The spy's body bounced on the yellow sand. First, blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. Then, his meridians were broken, and blood seeped out of his entire body. This corpse was kicked up by Su Fengnian and slammed into a warhorse in front of him. After the dozen or so riders at the front died without any resistance, the surviving riders finally lost the courage to charge to their deaths. Some people began to retreat. There were hot-blooded people in the world who were not afraid of death. There were also people who were afraid of death but could calmly die for it. However, these brave and skilled Beimang elites did not wish to die at the hands of an enemy whose name and identity they did not even know. Su Fengnian stamped his foot slightly and stretched out a hand. On the ground in front of him, yellow sand swords rose from the ground. After about half an incense stick's worth of time, the old man in embroidered clothes, who had brought Princess Hongyan and dashed for more than 20 li, straightened his back in an instant. A cold voice rang out from behind him. "The two of you are old acquaintances I met at Tumbling Horse Pass. Do you not value your lives at all?" Then, Princess Hongyan realized that her buttocks were lightly padded. The person behind her smiled and said, "The old debt is settled. So you can die now." Chapter 1261. There are still 2 chapters left, but it's definitely late, especially the 3rd chapter. Every dog has its day. At the Tumbling Horse Pass, the old Dragon King escorted the woman with a mink headscarf into the dangerous northern Liang border pass. She saw the young man with a pair of beautiful eyes and thought that he was just a disciple of an aristocratic family, who knew a little about martial arts. She wanted to tease him, so she did as she pleased and touched his buttocks. Who would have thought that the tables would turn so quickly? Today, after he patted her buttocks, the princess, the only descendant of the royal family who could make the Empress of Beimang willing to play with her grandson, did not even have the courage to turn around. The old man in embroidered clothes was indeed the ancestor of Beimang's spider web. He gently pushed Princess Hongyan's shoulder and pushed her far away. Her life was hanging by a thread, so she did not care about controlling her strength and fell into the yellow sand more than 10 feet away. After sending her out of danger temporarily, the old Dragon King let out a light shout. His voice was like spring thunder, and his qi flowed like a flood. Thousands of tiny cracks appeared on his luxurious brocade clothes that were not inferior to those made in Jiangnan. The old Dragon King did not turn around. He did not even turn his head. He raised his arm and smashed backward. The sleeves on his arm instantly turned into fine powder. Dragon King Hulu Tieguan was an expert who had been famous in northern Mang for a long time. Before Tuoba Bodhisattva, Murong Baoding, Hong Jingyan, and the other new talents had risen to prominence, the heaven-warping Hulu Tieguan was once viewed as a peak expert who could block spear immortal Wang Xiu's spear with his bare hands. Hulu Tieguan's close-quarters combat skills couldn't be said to be weak, especially his tenacious muscles and bones. Before Murong Baoding obtained the great reputation of immovable Wisdom King, he had even asked Hulu Tieguan for guidance on body-tempering secret techniques. When the Empress of Beimang was purging the Jianghu forces, Hulu Tieguan, who was summoned, showed off his skills. 8 siege chariots with 200 strong men each threw 8 stones weighing 180 pounds at the same time towards the Dragon King Hulu Tieguan, who was standing 2,000 feet away. The old man smashed the stones with his fist in the air, and did not let any of the stones fall to the ground. The old but vigorous Hulu Tieguan's arm swung out like wind and thunder. Su Fengnian stretched out his right hand and casually grabbed the old Dragon King's wrist. He snapped his fingers and broke Chongqing. Hulu Tieguan instantly felt that the rapidly flowing qi in his body was cut off, like a fast ship suddenly encountering a chain across the river. Moreover, this chain was not only in one place, but in 6 important acupoints of his body, as if it had forcibly set up 6 barriers in his body. Even if you are a fine horse that can travel 1,000 li in a day, under the heavy snow,
You will not be able to move forward. Hulu Tai Guan was trembling all over. Blood spurted out from the gaps between his teeth. Even if he was injured, he still wanted to break through those iron chains. He tried his best to connect all the meridians in his body. The old Dragon King was very decisive and ruthless. However, since Su Fengnian had made a move, he would not hesitate. He raised his left hand like a knife and placed it on Hulu Tai Guan's shoulder and ear. Then he slapped his left hand and grabbed the old man's wrist. Hulu Tai Guan's head was violently shaken. What was even more shocking was that the old man's entire arm was pulled out from his body by Su Fengnian. At the same time, the right side of Hulu Tai Guan's head was densely covered in bright red threads. They were like countless red snakes wantonly swimming in his skin. Hulu Tai Guan's strong points were his extraordinary strength, dragon tendons and iron bones. He was incomparably proficient in close combat. However, he definitely did not know that if he let Su Fengnian get close to him and tremble, it would be tantamount to letting the Liang dynasty's Han Wudi, who was known as the Land Immortal, get close to him. And the only person in the world who was proficient in killing celestial state experts, Han Xianxia, should be able to kill a finger celestial state expert. Hulu Tai Guan, whose arm had been torn off, had his feet deeply sunk into the sand. His eyes were wide open as he stared into the distance, not moving at all. Su Fengnian gently let go of the arm and turned around to look at the insufferably arrogant woman with the marten forehead. This sorrowful Princess Hongyan was sitting on the ground in a daze. She did not know why the old Dragon King, who was rarely matched in her mind, was motionless. She only knew that the old man was definitely seriously injured. She would never have thought that the legendary figure of Bei Mang, Hulu Tai Guan, had already breathed his last. Su Fengnian looked at this woman who had probably forgotten to run away. Neither of them spoke. She suddenly shouted in a stern voice, "Old Dragon King, kill him! He's the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian. As long as you kill him, I'll personally go to His Majesty and ask for your reward. You can be a great general and be the prefect of discipline." Princess Hongyan was not stupid. On the contrary, she was an extremely intelligent and shrewd woman. Otherwise, she would not have been able to deal with the two surnames, Yelu and Murong. She cried out, "Hulu Tai Guan, why don't you make a move?" With a face full of tears she choked out, "Old Dragon King, at least move a little bit." Su Fengnian looked at this woman's marten forehead, but his left hand was already on the cold saber at his waist. Princess Hongyan suddenly calmed down. She stood up and patted off the yellow sand and dust on her dress. She tidied up her messy black hair and the slanted sable scarf on her forehead. She slowly asked, "Can I choose a way to die that isn't ugly?" Chapter 1262. Su Fengnian did not answer this question. Instead, he smiled and said, "Do you have anything that can be exchanged for your life? For example, the movements of Dong Zhuo and Lu Gui's armies? Or do you have any news about the orphans of Yelu de Tong? Or else, you can talk about the two large camps of heavy cavalry in Beimang." The corners of her mouth twitched. She did not hide her sarcasm at all. Su Fengnian's thumb gently pushed the knife out of its sheath. At this moment, a rider galloped over. On the back of the horse was a young rider whose face was covered in blood. He even had an extra horse with him. Looking at his attire and accessories, it was neither fish nor fowl. He had the armor and saber of the Lu Centurion, as well as the unique short saber of Black Fox Lang. On his back was a huge bow with carved feathers. It was likely that this rider had made a fortune from the dead. Princess Hongyan turned her head to look at the rider who had just survived a disaster. Her eyes were full of disdain and hatred. She did not need to think to know that this was a traitor. On the Beimang grasslands, this kind of man had the lightest bones. The young rider who had relied on horsemanship and archery to enter the personal cavalry of the Lu general stopped his horse and panted heavily. He also looked at the woman with the mink hair covering her forehead. Previously, in the army camp, he had only seen her a few times from a distance. At that time, one of the generals had respectfully led her and her entourage to the general's tent. He did not even dare to think that he would be able to talk to this kind of rich and noble woman in his lifetime. As for the disdain in her eyes at this moment, this young man who had indeed defected couldn't help but lower his eyelids. However, he quickly raised his head. He did not look at the woman who made people feel ashamed of their inferiority. Instead, he looked at the slender back of the swordsman. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. The previous scene was still vivid in his mind. Including him,
the 300 riders began to retreat and flee. This swordsman of similar age had cast sand flying swords out of thin air.
When he turned around, he saw with his own eyes that the swords had pierced through the backs of his fellow soldiers.
Occasionally, a knight would use his scimitar to shatter the flying swords, but he could not stop the second flying sword from piercing through his chest. A comrade was pierced through his shoulder by a flying sword and fell off his horse. His entire body was nailed into the sand.
While the man was chasing after the comrade, he casually stretched out his hand and pressed down.
The injured comrade who was struggling for his life a few feet away sank into the ground, stirring up a cloud of yellow sand. Then, he disappeared without a sound. After one of the Black Fox Lanzi fell off his horse, his entire chest was pierced by a flying sword. He staggered as he charged towards this person, but this person brushed past him. The Black Fox Lanzi's legs left the ground, and his head seemed to have been hit by a heavy hammer. He leaned back and fell heavily to the ground.
A centurion of the personal guards of the Lu army was lying on the ground, barely breathing. That person used the cold blade in his hand, which had yet to be unsheathed, to knock lightly on his head.
Just like that, his entire head exploded.
When that person got closer and closer to him, as if possessed, he no longer urged his horse to run wildly.
Instead, he turned his horse around and blocked the path. However, he did not go to his death. Instead, he waited for death.
He did not know what he was doing.
He only watched as that person continuously controlled the flying sword to kill people.
If there was someone next to him who had not yet breathed their last, he would use the cold blade in his scabbard or a newly forged flying sword to finish them off expressionlessly. At that moment, in the eyes of this little pawn who was in a state of death, the entire sky was like a swarm of flying swords.
Then, these flying swords wove together into a vast net. There were 6 or 7 Black Fox Lanzi who were fighting like trapped beasts.
They passed by the dazed pawn, roaring as they charged towards that person. Then, both the riders and their horses were carried into the sky by the flying swords with astonishing penetrative power.
In the end, they fell to the ground together.
In his eyes, for a few moments, he seemed to see that person breathing in and out. One breath was as fine as a drop of water.
One breath was like a gently trembling lotus leaf. One breath was like a whale swallowing heaven and earth. For some reason, that person brushed past him, but did not kill him. When he was the only one left alive among the 300 riders, that person appeared by his side. Using fluent Baimang language, he ordered him to pick any armor, swords, and arrows he wanted. Then, he asked him to bring an extra warhorse and leave with him. Probably because he felt that he had already died once, the young rider at that time had forgotten his fear. After returning from the gates of hell, he still had the mood to pick up those good items that he had long been envious of. He changed into a good horse, put on armor, equipped himself with a war blade, and carried a large bow on his back. Not a single item was left behind. The young man even changed into a new pair of sturdy leather boots for himself. The wind swept up the yellow sand. The only ones left alive were these 3 people and 2 horses. Princess Hong Yen looked at Su Fengnian.
She pointed at the young rider and said through gritted teeth, "You killed him."
Su Fengnian used a gaze that looked like he was sizing up a madman.
He looked mischievously at this most noble woman of the imperial family in the desert. "He's worth much more than you."
Su Fengnian continued, "He won't die. But I'll give you one last chance. As long as you can take out something valuable enough to buy your life, I'll promise not to kill you."
Princess Hong Yen screamed crazily, "Kill him! This kind of person doesn't deserve to be a Baimang man."
Su Fengnian raised his arm and made a cold gesture of chopping at the young rider.
The rider steadied his breathing and began to charge forward with his blade without hesitation.
Princess Hong Yen was completely dumbfounded. She could allow herself to die at the hands of the king of Bailiang. But she would never allow herself, a princess of Baimang, the only daughter of the Yunnan province's provincial magistrate, who was deeply doted on by the empress, to die under the blade of a grassland traitor. Moreover, this nameless coward was so despicable. She smiled bitterly and looked at Su Fengnian with hatred. Then, she quickly pulled out a dagger and stabbed it toward her own heart. Chapter 1263. The sun was setting in the west, and the 2 riders were riding slowly on a flat sandy land commonly known as Longan. 30 miles to the south was Huta City, the most majestic city in Bailiang's border. There were 30,000 elite soldiers, 3,000 heavy cavalry, 6,000 light cavalry,
and more than 20,000 infantry inside and outside the city. Even if the people in the city were not listed as soldiers, as long as they were in the prime of their lives, they could put on armor and fight on horseback in a hurry. Behind Huta City was the newly established Huaiyang Pass of the Protectorate of Northern Liang. To the left and right of Huaiyang Pass were the two great pass cities of Liuya and Taifeling, both of which had more than 10,000 soldiers. Unlike Huta City, which had an absolute advantage in terms of infantry, Liuya and Taifeling were almost entirely composed of cavalrymen in light armor. Clearly, they were different from Huta City, which was mainly used to stop the northern Mang's army from advancing south. These two border cities, which were slightly inferior in scale, were more responsible for taking the initiative to attack. Behind the first line of defense was the second line of defense, with Jinyuan, Qinghe, and Grave as the fulcrum, and Xianxia and Xinwu as the flanks in the north of Liangzhou, followed by the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, which was stationed at the border of Liangzhou all year round, and the two deputy commanders of infantry and cavalry, Chen Yunchui and He Zhonghu's army. Coupled with the crisscrossing watchtowers of Wubao Castle, there was no doubt that the northern border of Liangzhou was the most difficult battlefield in Beiliang. Generally speaking, Beimang was the least likely to attack the heavily guarded northern line of Liangzhou. If the northern barbarians really wanted to open their mouths and take over this place, it would not be as simple as breaking teeth and swallowing blood. Compared to northern Liangzhou's northern line, Yozhou's side was mostly infantrymen. That was why Infantry Great Commander Yan Wenluan's tent was also located there. Regardless of whether it was the terrain of Yozhou's northern line or the distribution of troops, it all decided that Yuzhou would be a typical offensive and defensive battle between the nomads of the north and the farmers of the Central Plains, one side attacking, one side defending. It wasn't like northern Liang's northern line where they relied on Su family's armored cavalry to fight northern Mang's cavalry on horseback. Originally, the Dragon Elephant Cavalry was stationed in the middle of Liangzhou and Liangzhou, so they could support both sides at any time and even roam around looking for opportunities. However, with the establishment of the 4th province, Liuzhou, and the 30,000-long Xiang army stationed there, a crack appeared in the close relationship between Liangzhou and Liangzhou. The number one city in the northwest of the Liang dynasty wasn't the provincial capital of the northern Liang, Liangling, and Nether provinces, but rather this tiger-head city that appeared out of nowhere and looked down on northern Mang. On the border of Liangzhou, there were some passes like Tuma Pass for merchants to enter and leave Liangmang, but to the north of Liangzhou, there was none. This place was destined to be filled with smoke signals and 100 battles, but never the sound of the camel bells of the caravans. Although there were only 2 riders, one of them was dragging a wretched woman whose hands were tied up. She was covered in dust, her lips were dry and cracked, and the pair of delicate embroidered shoes on her feet, which looked like those of a graceful girl from Jiangnan, were also in tatters, revealing her bloody toes. Her body was on the verge of collapse, but she was still holding on. When she was able to raise her head and look into the distance towards Tigerhead City that was rumored to be most fond of displaying the heads of northern Mang captives, because of this untimely pause, she was dragged to the ground by the warhorse. That horseman didn't turn around. She struggled with all her might to get up, or else she would be dragged towards Tigerhead City like this. However, she was already too exhausted to stand up, only able to turn around. A wave of scorching pain came from her back as she slid across the gravel. This type of pain didn't come from how great the pain was in an instant, but rather from the endless, bit-by-bit accumulation. That Beimang rider who was following orders couldn't help but turn his head to shoot a glance. This woman who was sitting high up in the clouds fell off the altar just like that, and in the end was dragged forward by him and his mount like a dog. He turned his head to look at the rider in front of him. He didn't know why this person didn't kill him, and he also didn't know why he didn't kill her. In the distance, there was a commotion. A group of several hundred riders with a majestic aura shook the earth as they approached. His heart contracted violently. This was the first time in his life that he had seen such a large number of Beiliang cavalry. He also quickly discovered that the Beiliang cavalry was different from the Lu cavalry he used to be in. The Lu cavalry was undoubtedly brave and ruthless when they broke through enemy lines and killed the enemy. After he joined the army, he was also like this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become one of General Lu Gui's personal guards. However, the feeling these northern Liang cavalry gave him was even more frightening. Previously, when he fought with the crossbowmen, it wasn't that obvious. He only felt that those well-known northern Liang crossbowmen's strength was indeed astonishing. However, when their numbers exceeded 300, it gave him an extremely strange feeling, as if these 300 to 400 cavalry were a single entity. When they urged their horses and brandished their whips, it was filled with a type of forbearance and restraint that would make all of the northern Mang's brave warriors feel extremely uncomfortable. The Huta city garrison in front of him even had the same degree of movement every time their bodies rose and fell along with the backs of their horses. He had only heard that the two large groups of heavy cavalry that had been raised with countless amounts of gold and silver could truly advance side by side when they were completely spread out in formation to charge in a single line.
These 400 riders dismounted almost at the same time. The leading middle-aged rider knelt on one knee. He lowered his head and cupped his fists. General Lu Jinu pays his respects to the prince. Then the 400 riders said in unison, "Respects to the prince." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Rise, all of you. This time, I've troubled General Lu to come out of the city to welcome me." The young captive behind Su Fengnian, who could still ride a horse and put on armor, was stunned for a moment. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. However, when he saw General Lu, who was wearing armor and carrying a crossbow and looked exactly like the rider behind him, stand up, he seemed to be a cripple. Chapter 1264. Then he knew who this plain-looking lame general was. He was Bailiang's #1 border general, Huta City's guard general Lame Lu. He didn't know who Lu Jinu was, but almost every soldier with the surname Lu had heard of this legendary Lame Lu in the desert. This person was different from Beimang's valiant generals, who were cursed at in Beimang the more they performed. Lame Lu was recognized as a great general in the world by the scholars of Beimang's southern dynasty. He governed the army strictly, but outside of the battlefield, he treated the soldiers like his own children. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters. His sons had died at the border, and his youngest son had died at the age of 16. Both of his daughters had married his subordinates, and both of them had become widows. Lame Lu was never merciful to his enemies, but he never killed the innocent. 14 years ago, during a long-distance revenge raid, he went deep into the heart of Gusai province and beheaded tens of thousands of people along the way. His leg had been pierced by a captive woman with a dagger, but Lame Lu still didn't kill her. He only left behind a sentence that no one knew whether it was true or false, but was widely spread on the grasslands. No matter if it's our Bailiang or your Beimang, only when all the men are dead will it be your women's turn. Lu Jinu accompanied Su Fengnian to the majestic Tiger Head city. More than half of his life was spent there. Looking at the tall city walls, the eyes of this military general, who had achieved great feats on the battlefield, were unusually warm. The 400 elite riders behind them slowly turned their horses around and returned. They couldn't help but glance at the 2 strange people. The young man riding the horse was dressed in northern barbarian attire and carried a lot of weapons. He was dragging a woman with a mink forehead who could only walk pitifully. After entering the city, Su Fengnian took a bath and changed his clothes. Lu Jinu and a few Huta city captains stood respectfully at the steps of the outer courtyard. The last time Su Fengnian patrolled the border as the new Prince Liang, he stopped at Huayang Pass and didn't come here. It was said that the captains at that time complained that this prince looked down on their Huta city and treated the soldiers of Huta city as the children of Bailiang's stepmother. The captain who led the 3,000 heavy cavalry openly declared that if he had the ability, he would let the cowardly garrison at Huayang Pass practice martial arts with him. He didn't want to bully the cavalry of Huayang Pass because they were light cavalry. At worst, he could borrow another 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers from them. He could still beat those guys without 3 rounds of charge. Su Fengnian saw a strong man who pretended to be calm but was obviously a little restrained. He waved his hand and motioned for the pillars of Huta city to sit down and talk. With Lu Jinu's experience and military achievements, he could talk calmly with the old Prince Liang. Of course, he wouldn't be at a loss when facing Su Fengnian, the new prince of Bailiang. He calmly sat on the stone bench. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ma Jili, who had scolded him the most after drinking, move the stone bench and sit at the back like a shy little girl who didn't dare to see her lover. Su Fengnian tilted his head, as if he was looking for someone. He deliberately asked with a smile, "General Lu, is Captain Ma, who said that even if he can't beat me in martial arts he can drink me down?" Lu Jinu held back his laughter and didn't speak. The captains, who were as rough as the sandstorm in the frontier fortress, couldn't help but laugh out loud. Their laughter was full of straightforward kindness. No matter how feminine a man was, he would probably be hardened by the scorching sun here year after year. No matter how narrow-minded a man was, he would probably be bullied by the vast sky here day after day. Ma Jili straightened his back and stuck his head out from behind his comrade's back. "Reporting to Wang Ye," he said.
Lowly officer is here. If you, senior, are really angry and want lowly officer to eat a whip, lowly officer will have no objection. But when I'm being whipped, can you find a place where my subordinates can't see? Otherwise, I'll be laughed at by those guys. Su Fengnian obviously didn't want to bicker with this man. He asked, General Lu, can everyone drink? Lu Jinu nodded and joked, of course, everyone can drink. That's how it is when these people fight. When it comes to drinking, everyone is number one. However, Ma Jili and Chu Hanqing both have to be on night patrol. As long as the others don't get too drunk, it's fine. Su Fengnian grunted. Then let's stop drinking. We can only make up for what we owe in the future. Lu Jinu turned his head and shouted, Ma Jili, go with Chu Hanqing and bring 2 jars of wine here. Then go on night patrol. Ma Jili was relieved. He ran out of the courtyard with another captain and quickly returned with 2 jars of green ant wine. Feeling guilty, Ma Jili didn't dare to stay any longer. He wanted to run away quickly. Chu Hanqing, the elegant captain of Huta City, hesitated for a moment. He looked at Su Fengnian and asked, Your Highness, I can't drink tonight. I don't know when and where I can drink next time. Can I use an empty bowl to offer a toast to Your Highness? Su Fengnian nodded. Chu Hanqing raised the empty bowl high. Su Fengnian stood up and drank the green ant wine in one gulp. Ma Jili asked nervously, Your Highness, how about I also offer you a toast? Su Fengnian smiled and drank another bowl. Su Fengnian sat back down on the stone bench. He looked at the border officers who all had sincere smiles on their faces and asked, General Lu, is there anything else Huta City needs? Feel free to ask. Lu Jinu held the bowl in one hand and rested the other on his lame leg. He shook his head with a smile and said, There's nothing else. Su Fengnian didn't say anything else. He drank silently with these old generals of northern Liang, who were already over 40 years old. In the end, Lu Jinu only said one sentence, Since Your Highness is sitting here, then I can say something that I thought I couldn't say. Huta City has more than 40,000 people. Today, they've all drunk Your Highness farewell wine. Even if they die, they have no regrets. Chapter 1265. When Lu Jinu and the other generals left the courtyard, Su Fengnian had the guards outside call for the 2 captives. Elsewhere, Commandery Princess Hongyan was wolfing down food. When she reluctantly walked into the courtyard, her clothes were still ragged, but her mouth was greasy. When she crossed the threshold, she even burped. This made the Lu cavalry soldier beside her, who was still wearing his armor and carrying his saber and bow, feel curious. He probably realized that a woman like her was not truly otherworldly after all. There was still half a jar of green ant wine left on the table. Clearly, Lu Jinu and the others had shown mercy. Su Fengnian picked up the wine bowl and pointed at a few stone stools. Commandery Princess Hongyan sat down. The young cavalry soldier, who respected Su Fengnian more and more like a god, still stood obediently. Commandery Princess Hongyan glanced at the wine jar and bowl on the table and subconsciously sniffed. She was not afraid of itching when she had so many lice, so she poured herself a bowl of wine. She had tasted green ant wine at Falling Horse Pass, and even in the imperial court and the capital. She did not think it tasted that good before, but today, the wine burned from the tip of her tongue to her throat, and then to her stomach. Her entire body instantly warmed up. She felt warm and full. At the same time, she looked at Su Fengnian with more provocation. She knew that Su Fengnian did not let her commit suicide, so it would be harder for her to die than to live. Of course, this was not necessarily a good thing. Before entering Tiger Head City, she had thought of countless sinister ways Su Fengnian could humiliate her as Commandery Princess Hongyan. However, looking at the current situation, while the situation was indeed terrible, it was still within her acceptable range. She raised her head and drank the wine in the bowl in one big gulp. Wiping the corner of her mouth, she said with a charming smile, What? Does Your Highness want me to serve you in bed? Then why don't you let me change into a clean set of clothes? Su Fengnian asked in return, Do you need me to send you a mirror so you can look at yourself? Princess Hongyan flew into a rage out of humiliation. Just as she was about to raise her hand to throw the wine bowl away, she quickly suppressed this impulse. She silently poured another bowl of wine. Every bowl she could get was a bowl. Su Fengnian ignored the featherless phoenix. He turned his head to look at the rider who called himself Chifu Longguan and said, You are very talented in martial arts.
That is why I did not kill you. There was another reason that Su Fengnian did not mention.
From the eyes of the dragon crown, one could not see the hatred that even an outsider like Princess Hongyan would have.
Even if a person could hide their expression and eyes, the flow of their qi could not be hidden from Su Fengnian's eyes. The fluctuation of qi was directly related to happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. This meant that Qifu Longguan, this unpolished jade that had been buried, might be able to go very far on the path of martial arts. Of course, the most important reason was that Su Fengnian hoped that there would be someone who could balance his disciple Yu Dilong in the future. This child was the youngest but was the eldest disciple. Unlike Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhong, whose personalities were clear, there were too many uncertainties. Su Fengnian did not want to have another Shenyuan Pan in his hands in the future. As for Qifu Longguan, he was like a random cat or dog picked up from the side of the road. His talent in martial arts was not the best that Su Fengnian had seen, but he was the most interesting. For example, Jiang Ni and the charcoal girl of the Guanyin sect were called sword embryos. For example, Hong Shixiang and Zhao Ningxian of Longhu Mountain were the reincarnations of enlightened masters and were called Bodhi seeds. The Buddhist sect also had the concept of reincarnated spiritual children. As for Qifu Longguan, he was a little different. He had a bit of everything and nothing was pure. But this was precisely the case. He was most in line with Su Fengnian's martial arts journey. Moreover, in that battle, Qifu Longguan had truly caught the thin line between the breaths of Su Fengnian, this celestial being.
In the present world, there were less than a handful of such people, and this nameless soldier was one of them.
Qifu Longguan was only 18 years old, but he was already one of Lu Gui's personal cavalry. One had to know that the #1 saber user, Gu Zhentang, might not even be as good as Qifu Longguan at this age. Of course, Su Fengnian was even more so back then. Qifu Longguan was a bit nervous.
He said in a trembling voice, "King of Bailiang, this lowly one has been an orphan since young.
I'll go wherever there's food to eat. If your highness doesn't trust this lowly one, you can let this lowly one join the Bailiang frontier army. Even a foot soldier is fine. I won't hesitate to kill Bei Meng." At this time, Princess Hongyan laughed sinisterly and fanned the flames. "Orphan? Maybe your parents died under the hooves of the Bailiang cavalry? It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge." Qifu Longguan was not as shrewd as her, but he was no fool. He couldn't hold back and cursed, "Bitch! Bullshit your mother." The young man said with red eyes, "My parents were beaten to death by you rich and powerful bastards from the Southern Dynasty." Princess Hongyan was furious. The Southern Dynasty? What is the Southern Dynasty? The entire Southern Dynasty is just a watchdog raised by the Yelu family. I am Yelu Hongkai, a lowly person like you who can't even walk within 100 steps of me. Qifu Longguan's breathing was rapid, his chest heaving up and down. He took a big step forward and slapped this woman. Princess Hongyan was not a blockhead. She lowered her head and retreated, hiding behind Su Fengnian like a wisp of smoke. She chattered with a smug expression, "Hey, you can't hit me. Look at you. You deserve to never be able to avenge your parents. Oh, maybe trash like you was in the army and worked for the Southern Dynasty. Maybe you worked for those enemies." Qifu Longguan suddenly calmed down and stared at this woman. Princess Hongyan felt a bone-deep chill. She carefully took back the wine bowl and poured herself another bowl of green ant wine. At this time, there was a light knock on the door. Su Fengnian poured 2 bowls of wine and said softly, "Senior Tantai, please come in." Chapter 1266. When the uninvited guest sat down, Su Fengnian passed her a bowl of wine. The other party did not stand on ceremony and drank a mouthful of wine. Her cheeks were slightly red. Yelu Hongkai looked at this tall lady curiously. Every move she made showed the bearing of a grandmaster. There was also a kind of heart-tugging free and easy style. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Senior, how did you know that I have arrived at Tiger Head City?" Tantai Pingjing said indifferently, "I heard from my master that the celestial beings look down on all living things in the world, just like how we look at the fireflies in the summer night. Most of the fireflies are fleeting, but there are always a few that are especially bright. At some point, they are even as bright as the stars." Su Fengnian suddenly understood. It must have been because they had intercepted and killed the 400 cavalrymen earlier that the Qi Refinement Grandmaster, who was good at observing aura, caught some clues. Then, she was just waiting for them near Tiger Head City.
According to Tantai Pingjing, or to be precise, according to the explanation of this master of the sect, the top masters of the world were only the people of the world, of the immortals in the clouds. However, for masters like Bodhisattva Tuoba and Chao Zhongqing, the fireflies they emitted were particularly eye-catching. Qi refinement warriors were mending the net of law on behalf of the heavens. Naturally, it would be easier for them to find this small group of experts. Su Fengnian asked, "Can it be said that when people seek Tao and attain Tao, they are using the light of a grain of rice to compete with the brightness of the moon?" Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "Master said that after cultivating Tao, it is nothing more than a drop of water in the sea. The water of the Yellow River comes from the sky? No, it comes from the sea. Therefore, it flows into the sea and never returns? No." Su Fengnian joked, "Your master's words are so sharp, so reasonable." Tantai Pingjing dismissed it with a smile as if she was a venerable. Su Fengnian stared at Princess Hongyan, who wanted to secretly pour a bowl of wine for herself. The latter retracted her hand resentfully. Su Fengnian pointed at the courtyard door. Chifu Longguan took the lead and left. Princess Hongyan waited for a moment and guessed that the brat had gone far away. Only then did she sneak over to the courtyard door and cross the threshold. In the end, a crisp and clear pa sound was heard, followed by Princess Hongyan's furious curses. Tantai Pingjing said softly, "Your Highness has a good eye." Su Fengnian was puzzled. "What do you mean?" She took a small sip of wine. "This man and woman are both people with good fortune. They are worthy of Prince's care." Su Fengnian sneered. "Luck?" Tantai Pingjing's expression didn't change. "If your luck is too good, then that is your destiny." If it were a normal person, would they be able to survive if they had an extra 100 lives when facing a martial arts expert who had started a massacre? Su Fengnian was about to speak when Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "You have your reasons, but it doesn't change the fact that they survived." She continued, "According to our previous agreement, our Guanyin sect will stay south of Huaiyang Pass and north of Qinghe Pass. We will also do our best to gather good fortune for Beiliang. However, whether we stay or leave in the end is not up to the Beiliang Frontier Army to decide." Su Fengnian nodded. "Of course." She still asked bluntly, "What if your Highness unfortunately dies?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Don't worry. If that day really comes, I will give it all to that charcoal girl before I die." Tantai Pingjing hovered the wine bowl and asked seriously, "The war is imminent. Isn't it a bit unlucky for you to say this to me?" Su Fengnian smiled at the woman who seemed to be completely ignorant of worldly affairs and asked, "What do you think?" Tantai Pingjing rested one arm on the stone table and the other hand holding the wine bowl. She raised her head to look at the starry sky. Su Fengnian was in a peaceful mood. He closed his eyes and slowly took a sip of wine. The two people who didn't look at each other casually asked and answered each other's questions. The Beimang army's forces on the border are almost at their limit, but they still have spare soldiers and horses to launch the next wave of attacks on the northern grasslands. Faced with an enemy that the entire Liang dynasty should be able to contend against, aren't you worried about Liuzhou, which has the least danger? Of course I'm worried. It's probably like when Su Xiao watched me go to the Central Plains and Beimang. To attack Liangzhou, Liuzhou, or Yuzhou, which one to attack first has its advantages and disadvantages for Beimang? What do you think? In truth, it doesn't matter where we attack first. My father, Su Xiao, my master, Li Yishan, Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan, Yan Wenluan, Chen Yunchui, He Zhonghu, and people like Lu Jinu of Hutu have already done the best they can for Beiliang. You might not believe it, but I'm beginning to think that Beiliang might really be able to hold on. But I don't know who will die on the battlefield in Beiliang. I don't want to know. Then why hasn't Tuoba appeared on the border? It's just like how the Zhao clan's son of heaven wants to keep Gu Jiantang in the north and not let him go to Guangling Road, because this is the dynasty's final trump card. When that old woman and the imperial tutor needed Tuoba to personally take action, it meant that the situation was starting to slip out of control. Before this, they were all confident that victory was in their grasp. Tantai Pingjing suddenly asked a very off-topic question. Why didn't you kill that Beimang princess? Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. After a moment of silence, he looked at the starry sky with her. Of course it's not that I like her. It's just that she reminds me of someone I miss very much. We both like Martin forehead coverings, have the same bad reputation, and have the same unyielding character.
I could have killed her, but I didn't because I wanted her to know how difficult it is to live. Tantai Pingjing poured the last bit of wine into her bowl and finished it in one gulp. Who do you really care about? Su Fengnian stretched out his finger and pointed at the starry sky. He said gently, "My eldest sister is there." After some time, Su Fengnian came back to his senses. He could not help but hold his forehead and sigh. This #1 Qi refinement warrior of the dynasty, who had extraordinary status and strength, not only fell asleep drunk, but was also snoring on the table. Su Fengnian could read her mind. He looked at her and sighed. You must be missing your master, right? Chapter 1267. As the morning mist rose, a group of people rode out of Tiger Head City's south gate and parted ways. Chifu Longguan changed into the armor of the Bailiang Light Cavalry, and at the same time received a new identity card. His name was also changed to Chifu Longguan. From today onwards, he was a member of the Bailiang Frontier Army. When he left the city, the young man who had betrayed Bei Mang would occasionally touch the cold saber at his waist. The Bailiang war saber was known as the Grand Su style, which meant that all war sabers in the world had to be made using the Su family's war saber. Chifu Longguan knew that if this war saber was sold in the royal court, it would be impossible to get it without 500 taels of silver. Moreover, there was a price but no market. Countless members of the royal family and the grassland were proud to be able to collect the complete set of Su Yongliang's saber. Chifu Longguan, who was used to being poor, had such a saber. His back straightened a bit, and he always felt that he was now a rich man. But there was a secret that made the young rider even more excited than the cold saber light crossbow and his identity. The king of Bailiang had passed on to him a nameless saber manual and a set of Wudong mantras. Chifu Longguan was now full of pride, and he was also willing to fight on the battlefield for the young new king of Liang. He followed the king of Bailiang's orders to escort Princess Hongyan to Luzhou. As long as he threw this Yelu woman to the border, he could ignore her. When the time came, he could directly join the Longxiang army. After that, whether he lived or died in the Battle of Liangmang would depend on his own luck. Yelu Hongkai hesitated, then turned his horse around and spurred it to catch up to Su Fengnian. He stopped his horse to block the way and said in a low voice, "You're just going to let me go back to Beimang like this?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "What else? Let the Jade Cicada Prefecture take out a mountain of gold and silver to redeem you? Even if your father is willing to pay, you are destined not to return alive. A proper princess captured by Bailiang as a captive, the Yelu family probably can't afford to lose face." Yelu Hongkai wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "Your life and death has no bearing on the big picture. Don't think too highly of yourself." Yelu Hongkai smiled playfully and said, "I originally wanted to reveal the whereabouts of the Beimang army, but since you don't want to listen to my calculations and guesses, then forget it." Su Yelu Hongkai's eyes, Yelu Hongkai. The woman narrowed her eyes, her face as dark as water. She fiercely slammed her horse whip and brushed past the repulsive fellow. Su Fengnian and Tantai Pingjing continued on their way to Huaiyang Pass. Seeing the questioning look of this Qi refinement grandmaster, Su Fengnian smiled softly and said, "Given Yelu Hongkai's scheming nature, I can't expect her to tell me the truth. She might even lie about the military situation to trick me once. Instead of being tormented by her words and becoming suspicious of everything, I might as well not listen." Yelu Hongkai smiled and said, "My intuition tells me that once this lady speaks, she will speak the truth." Su Fengnian mocked himself. "It sounds like we have suffered a great loss?" But he did not call back Princess Hongyan, who might be kind-hearted once in a while. Tantai Hongyan smiled and did not speak anymore. She was tall. Although she was 100 years old, her face was still youthful. She was dressed in snow-white clothes. When she galloped, her clothes fluttered in the wind, like a huge white lotus blooming on the desert. At this moment, this scene was worthy of being described as shocking. After a moment of silence, Tantai Hongkai suddenly asked curiously, "Beimang has a huge debate on whether to attack the Bailiang in the west or the Liang dynasty in the east. If not for the mysterious royal tutor from the chess and sword music school and the new king of the south courtyard, Dong Zhua, who insisted on attacking the Bailiang first, Yu Bailiang would be the laughingstock of Gujiantang now. Apart from that, most of the Beimang generals and officials, as well as the most powerful factions in the grassland, felt that it was more worthwhile to attack the east. After all, if they defeated the two lines of defense,
they would be able to force their way to Great Peace City. They might even be able to cooperate with West Chu's revival in Guangling Road. This would exhaust the Liang dynasty's army and make them unable to cooperate with each other. Why would the Empress of Beimang stand her ground against all opinions and agree to fight the Beiliang to the death? Isn't this exactly what the Empress of the Zhao family wanted? Besides, even if we take down Beiliang, we still have Chen Jibao's Western Shu as a buffer. Su Fengnian smiled and interrupted Tantai Hongcai's words. It's very simple. Beimang can attack Beiliang with all their strength, but they definitely won't dare to attack the Liang dynasty in the east. They don't dare to expose their butts to the 300,000 border soldiers of Beiliang. The Beiliang cavalry, who have experienced hundreds of battles, not only have unparalleled mobility, they are also very familiar with the desert terrain and long-distance raids. The northern Mang dare to send 200,000 soldiers to sit opposite Gu Jiantang, drink wine, eat meat, drink tea, and admire the moon. If it was the northern Liang, they would have eaten until not even the bones were left. Then, they would swagger in and the entire southern dynasty would suffer. It's not that the Taiping Commandery and Fatty Dong don't know what the Liang Imperial Court is planning, but they don't have a choice. If they don't take down Beiliang in one go and attack the eastern line that seems simple but is actually controlled by Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, and Chen Jibao, Beimang would be wasting their national strength. And the most important thing is, Tantai Hongcai suddenly understood and nodded. I understand. As long as the Beiliang cavalry stays in the northwest, it means that even if the Liang dynasty loses the eastern line and even causes Great Peace City to be trapped, they still have enough initiative to change the stalemate. However, if Beimang successfully defeats Beiliang in one go, the initiative will switch to the Beimang Empress. In particular, if the Beiliang cavalry, known as the best in the world, is completely wiped out, no matter how much the people of the Central Plains dislike the Beiliang Su family, they have already lost half of their souls. If even Beiliang can't stop Beimang's iron hooves going south, then who can stop them? Su Fengnian sighed emotionally. Ever since Zhang Julu came to power, he didn't really support the military affairs of the northwest border, but he also didn't restrict them too much. This is also the strength of the Grand Secretary. It seems quiet and inactive, and there are suspicions that Beiliang is nurturing a tiger, but in reality, he is helping the Zhao family win a day of sitting on the mountain and watching the tigers fight. Tantai Hongcai gazed at Great Peace City in the east and murmured, the son of the Zhao family has already made a choice between home and country. Liang is committing suicide. Chapter 1268. Su Fengnian sneered, that's why the court is waiting for a good show to begin, but the biggest contributor behind the scenes won't be able to see this day. Isn't it because they're afraid that the new emperor won't be able to suppress the old Grand Secretary? They're afraid that too many poor carps will jump over the dragon's gate. When these wild carps enter the court and gradually band together, they'll all be barefooted guys who aren't afraid of wearing shoes. If they die, then they die. In any case, they'll be alone in the world, unlike the sons of wealthy families who still have to consider the interests of the huge families behind them. Even if more than half of these poor men are greedy for the feeling of wealth and honor, as long as 2 or 3 of them refuse to be controlled and dare to stiffen their necks to oppose the emperor, pleading for the people all day long, then it'll be enough for the emperor of the Zhao family to suffer. The next person to sit on the dragon throne, Zhao Zhuan, doesn't have the military merit of the previous emperor unifying the Central Plains, nor does he have the current emperor's 20 years of experience of suppressing civil and military officials like Su Xiao, Zhang Julu, and Gu Jiantang. Zhao Zhuan's father, if he doesn't do something before he dies, how can he be at ease handing over the entire world to Zhao Zhuan? Therefore, he painstakingly invited Qi Yanglong, who is already half in the yellow earth, to be the imperial tutor. By the time the old fellow stabilizes the situation in the court, he'll be about to die of old age. By that time, Zhao Zhuan will already be fully fledged. The vassal kings and generals will also have their military power stripped. In addition, he'll have the assistance of ministers like Yin Maochun, who don't have a deep enough foundation. He'll also be able to promote the sons and grandsons of wealthy families to keep the former in check. He won't have to be as diligent as the current emperor. He can just lie down comfortably and be the emperor. Sometimes, when I think about that blue-eyed man, I really feel that it's not worth it for him. Tantai Pingjing sighed. Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, I just don't know if the Grand Secretary feels that it's not worth it for Beiliang? Tantai Pingjing smiled and asked, is there resentment? Su Fengnian exhaled and said in a deep voice, my resentment is great. Tantai Pingjing said, It just so happens that Bei Meng bumped into the tip of Bailiang's blade. Su Fengnian looked at the sky. Perhaps this year's snow couldn't cover the blood. The headquarters of the Northern Liang Protectorate within Huaiyang Pass was still ridiculously simple and crude. This made the Huaiyang commandant, Huang Laifu, very nervous. Although he could not say that he was unable to eat or sleep in peace, every time he went to participate in the military affairs of the Protectorate General, he would always feel that this was not the case. A few of his close friends liked to use this matter to poke at him. Huang Laifu didn't even have a chance to talk back. He could only accept his fate. Over time, he became the #1 joke in Liangzhou's northern border. But as the atmosphere of the impending war grew thicker and thicker, these harmless jokes quickly disappeared. Today, Huang Laifu went to the Protector's manor to do official business. Recently, several generals and commanders were in the manor, discussing the deployment of Bei Meng's troops and the direction of the main attack. Huang Laifu was a rough man who knew how to fight but was not good at talking. He couldn't get a word in. But when he heard the arguments of the old generals and commanders, he felt very comfortable. He felt that as long as they were in charge of the border, not to mention the fact that the Bailiang frontier army was strong and unharmed, even if Huta City was accidentally lost, Huang Laifu would take it back without a second thought. When Huang Laifu walked into the lobby of the Protector's manor, which was hung with maps of various sizes, he obviously felt something strange. In the center of the lobby, there was a huge table made of yellow pear wood. On both sides of the table, there were many new faces. Infantry Commander Yan Wenluan, an experienced general, should be visiting Huaiyang Pass for the first time. Cavalry Commander Yuan Zuozong was also here. Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, He Zhonghu, and Chen Yunchue, the 4 new and old deputy commanders were here for the first time. Qi Danghua, one of the general's adopted sons, was also standing on one side. Yuzhou Provincial Governor Hu Kuei and Yuzhou General Huang Fuqiu stood side by side. Liangzhou Provincial Governor Wang Peifong, who had just been promoted from Yuzhou Provincial Governor to a higher position, was trembling with fear. This Bailiang Provincial Governor, who could be said to have made a name for himself, was standing alone in the most remote corner. Obviously, on this occasion, the fart of any other armored general would be more effective than him, a civil official, shouting at the top of his lungs. But the person that shocked Huang Laifu the most was the second princess, Su Weisheng. She sat in a wheelchair, her hands interlaced as she stared at the map of the border on the table. The Bailiang Protector General held an inkstone in one hand and a brush in the other. The ink in the inkstone was crimson-red ink. Chu Lushan stood by Su Weisheng's side, bending over to draw red lines on the map while constantly speaking softly. Huang Laifu tiptoed over. There were already 20-some people standing on both sides of the table, so he could only find a place to sit. He just happened to hear Chu Lushan say in a low voice, "Earlier, we sent a ballista archer into the heart of Gusai province and discovered that Lu Gui's army had already set out. Now, we can confirm that they're heading for Liuzhou. Other than Lu Gui's 30,000 elite soldiers, the 4 military towns to the south, including tile-building Gentleman's Pavilion, have also moved out in full force. The old noble clans of Longguan have also brought out 30,000 infantry, and there are also the 8,000 Chong cavalry from Gusai province that require our attention. Together, these 100,000 soldiers are all heading for the current capital of Liuzhou, Azure City." Chu Lushan used his brush to point at a certain area north of Azure City. The 30,000 infantry from the noble clans of Longguan will be used as the main force to attack the city. This much is obvious. Then, he lightly drew a line between Azure City and Linyao military town. If nothing unexpected happens, the 8,000 Chong cavalry will be waiting here to tie down the reinforcements on the western front of Liuzhou. If they can win, they fight. If they can't win, they run. The Chong cavalry doesn't have any other abilities, but their ability to run is top-notch. I've already experienced it for myself more than a decade ago. The generals in the room all smiled knowingly. During the first Northern Mang-Liyang battle, everyone knew that Chu Lushan, who shone brilliantly in the smoke of battle, had 2 regrets. The first was that he wasn't able to kill Dong Zhuo, who was also a fatty, and the second was that he actually wasn't able to chase down that routed Chong cavalry. Chu Lushan moved the tip of his brush, drawing a line between Liuzhou and Azure City. As the main force, Lu Gui's army should be here. Su Weisheng frowned. When he heard this, he interrupted Chu Lushan's words. Are they just going to retreat and let Lu Gui infiltrate Liuzhou?
Even if Liuzhou only has 30,000 Longxiang army, they don't have to be so passive. Ancestor Gu bent over the map with his hands behind his back. He slowly said, if we say that Liuzhou and Yuzhou borders can wait, then Liuzhou doesn't need to wait. The 30,000 Longxiang army only needs to find Lu Gui's main force and defeat them. The rest of the scattered soldiers are nothing to be afraid of. Beiliang has this ability outside the gates of the Kingdom of War. The deputy commander of the cavalry, He Zhong, suddenly said, don't look at how Lu Gui's side has the advantage in numbers. This amount of soldiers isn't enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Even if Dong Zhuo has a backup plan, based on their current deployment, there won't even be enough time to collect the corpses of their warhorses. Chu Lushan extended 2 fingers and pinched the crimson tip of his brush. He turned a deaf ear to He Zhong's words. He only stared at his slightly ink-stained fingers and calmly said, the bait is too small to catch a big fish. Chu Lushan suddenly laughed. In the silent room, it was particularly eye-catching. This protector general stuck his thumb and index finger together and raised his hand. He smiled and said, our Beiliang cavalry is too strong. We have to give our opponents a little bit of hope. Chapter 1269. There are only 2 chapters today. There was a side room in the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate Manor. Rumor had it that there were a bunch of petty officials gathered there. They were all insignificant officials who were neither learned nor trained in martial arts. However, the Protector General would often enter this side room. Other than that, this side room was rarely visited. Contrary to what the outside world had imagined, the side room was not desolate. There were only a few old pedants gathered together and sighed. On the contrary, it was very lively. Many young faces had appeared, making the room seem particularly lively. There were maps hanging on the east and west walls of the room. There were maps of the borders of Beiliang and the 2 provinces of Beimang. The maps on the 2 walls were the same. The only difference was that they were old. The east wall was old, while the west wall was new. There were 2 people sitting at a table in the room. There was always a person standing at the table with a brush in his hand, in charge of recording some words. The tables were piled with Beimang records and secret files. Many of these things were probably not even available to the Southern Dynasty's Ministry of War and Ministry of Revenue. The reason why the east and west walls were divided into old and new ones was a suggestion made by a junior in the room. Since the enemy's commander-in-chief, Dong Zhuo, had been biding his time and did not show any signs of mobilizing troops, Beiliang might as well investigate the changes in the 2 provinces of Beimang that bordered Liangmang over the past few years. They circled the cities and towns that had increased their military strength in recent years, as well as the new courier routes that had been opened at great expense. They also focused on finding out the training grounds at the Beimang border over the years. The young man who gave this suggestion was surnamed Yu. It was said that he was an idle scholar who had gone to Liangmang to seek refuge in the Yamen, where he could not get enough money. Only then did he enter the room through his connections. There were 6 or 7 other miscellaneous officials who entered the room at the same time as Yu. Some of them were sons of generals who had studied the military, and were born with a scholarly air. There were also some who had similar backgrounds as Yu. They were all scholars from other provinces who were picked up by others. Their ambitions were higher than the sky, but their lives were thinner than paper. Most of the older seniors in the room were frustrated people who had not made a name for themselves in the officialdom. They had one thing in common. Their necks were hard and their knees were even harder. They did not know how to bow and bend their knees. Usually, they liked to drown their sorrows in alcohol. Once they drank too much, they would naturally be unable to control their mouths and talk about the state affairs. Then one day, they would suddenly be taken to the border by the Whispering Room's spies. They did not even have the chance to say goodbye to their families before they disappeared into thin air. At first, they were scared witless, thinking that they were going to be beheaded by the temperamental Great Demon Chu. Later, they found out that they were just helping to analyze the situation of the war. Gradually, they calmed down. However, although they had become guests of the Protectorate General and were working for the Protectorate General, they did not have any official rank or salary. They were neither in heaven nor on earth, so it was not a pleasant job. Fortunately, these people had long worn away their ambitions in the officialdom. They were able to endure the dull and tedious work in the room. In addition, Lord Chu Lushan's reputation was too frightening. Every one of them was cautious and conscientious. They were afraid that one day, Chu Lushan would feel that they were officials who did not want to work hard without complaint. Then with a crack, their heads would be chopped off.
The outsiders who often came in and out of the room were all people who had walked out of the Fu Shui room. They constantly sent strange things to the people in the room. There were documents on the recent promotions of the Ministry of War, reports from the Ministry of Revenue on the amount of grain that had been lost in various places. There were even papers of different textures. Specific details such as which beacon and which relay road had been repaired were written down. These Fu Shui room spies came and went hurriedly. When they entered the room, they did not say a word. They put down the secret records and silently left, their eyes never looking sideways. In the words of Sir Hong, who was temporarily in charge of the room, they were ruthless people who killed without blinking and slept without closing their eyes. The older ones, like Sir Hong, believed in doing more and speaking less. At most, they would occasionally sigh with emotion. As for the young man called Yu Daji, he was even more like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. He dared to speak freely in the room. The young scholarly Yu and Zhao Ying, whose father was the county magistrate of Lingzhou, had a great argument 2 days ago about whether the Beimang army should be attacking Liuzhou or not. The argument was so earth-shattering that even Sir Chu was alarmed. At dusk, Sir Hong, whose eyesight was not good, even though he was sitting by the window, where the light was the best, he still lit an oil lamp. When he turned his head, he heard the sound of light footsteps that he was used to. Turning his head, he saw an extremely young and tender Fu Shui room spy. After entering the room, he handed over a letter to Wang Guifeng, who was in charge of receiving the item. Sir Hong no longer feared these people who had once made all of the Bailiang officials feel their hairs stand on end. It was not that Sir Hong was bold, but after all, he was working for the Protector General. It was no different from having a golden protective talisman stuck to his forehead. What was there to be afraid of? However, it was impossible for Sir Hong to have a good impression of these people. It was not just him. Most of the people in the room did not want to have anything to do with the Fu Shui room. Sir Hong inadvertently discovered that after his old friend Wang Guifeng and the young spy walked out, he revealed a carefully concealed expression of disdain and bad luck. He used his fingers to pinch the document and quickly placed it on the young man Yu Daji's desk. Sir Hong stood up and pretended to look at the map on the wall. When he passed by Yu Daji's desk, he saw that it was a page that had been casually torn off by someone. Most of it was soaked in blood, but the blood had already dried. Chapter 1270. Sir Hong shook his head helplessly. These spies from the Fu Shui chamber were too careless. The things they sent over every few days were either wrinkled, as if they had been pulled out of the water, or grit could still be shaken out of them. Today, it was even more exaggerated. It was even stained with blood. In the dusk outside the room, the young spy raised his arm and fiercely wiped his eyes. Then he walked down the steps and left with large strides. The spy saw a young man in casual clothes standing at the door to the courtyard. The two looked at each other. The spy's eyes were filled with well-hidden wariness. His intuition told him that if this person was an enemy, he would probably die. The two brushed past each other. Even though the young spy knew that this person could appear in the protectorate personally watched by Sir Chu, he was definitely not a spy from Beimang. However, the young man still subtly bent down slightly, one hand tucked into his sleeve. Only when the distance between them increased did he feel relieved. He realized that his hand holding the dagger was covered in sweat. The young spy was somewhat curious. That person was not very old, so why was he able to make him unconsciously assume a posture as if he was facing a great enemy? When Su Fengnian quietly walked into the room, Wang Guifeng, whose desk was near the door, raised his eyelids. He only thought that this was another spy from the Fu Shui chamber. He stood up and extended his hand. Su Fengnian asked quietly, "Where is the thing that was just sent over?" Yu Daji suddenly raised his head. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the incognito king of Beimang shake his head slightly. He understood and stood up, handing the paper to Su Fengnian. He was none other than Yu Luandao, the eldest grandson of the Yu family, a powerful clan in the Central Plains. His pseudonym was Yu Daji, and he worked as a handyman in this house. He was a nobody, and he spent all his time picking and choosing from those secret records and documents. In fact, as long as Yu Luandao wanted to get an official position, Hu Kuei, the provincial governor of Liangzhou, who was deeply respected by Su Fengnian, could make him a fourth-rank general, not to mention others. The piece of paper that Yu Luandao handed to Su Fengnian was a page from the famous prose collection, Small Window Leisure, written by Lu Jingsheng, the literary giant of the former southern Tang dynasty.
It was widely circulated among the remaining elders of the spring and autumn period.
However, the pages of this Southern Tang edition could not be considered very valuable, and the text on the page was also very popular. However, the line of hastily written words added at the end of the page might not be worth 1,000 gold, but it was definitely more valuable than the life of the writer.
Before the great battle, the scouts would die first. But many people didn't know that spies would die earlier. Moreover, they would only die silently. It couldn't even be considered tragic. Yul Wandao wanted to open his mouth to explain that those scattered, obscure, and unwritten words should be linked together in the secret file unique to Fu Shui Room to explain why. Outsiders didn't know that Fu Shui Room had an extremely hidden book of explaining words. Different death warriors and spies corresponded to their own written explanations. Therefore, even if a secret spy report was intercepted by Bei Mang, it would still be meaningless. The spy who sent this page was codenamed 24-Foot in Fu Shui Room. Yul Wandao needed to flip to the 24th chapter of the Book of Explaining Words on his desk to obtain the exact content. Su Fengnian was silent. Tightly holding the page, he walked to the wall and raised his head to look at a map of Gusai Prefecture. Sir Hong was confused.
Unlike those inflexible spies of Fu Shui Room, he guessed that this person might be the son of a general who was related to some important figure in the protectorate.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to walk into this room. Looking at the situation, Yu Daji, whom he and Wang Guifeng privately said was Yu Daji, was most likely familiar with this person. Sir Hong pulled on Yu Daji's sleeve and said softly, "Little Yu, is this your friend? This is against the rules. If the Protector General finds out, you and I will both have to bear the consequences."
Yul Wandao said softly, "It's fine."
Even the usually easygoing Sir Hong couldn't help but feel anxious. The rules set by Protector General Chu were greater than the sky at the border of Bailiang. How could a little scholar say it was fine? When the time came, everyone in the room would be implicated by Yu Daji, who had broken the rules.
Just as Sir Hong was about to remind the young man that it was time to leave the room, he suddenly heard the man murmur, "The historian's family is unfortunate, the country is fortunate, the country does not prosper, the family prospers." Sir Hong, who had studied hard for many years, immediately understood.
Wasn't this a passage written by the great Southern Tang prose master Lu Jingsheng in Small Window Leisure? Next, Sir Hong saw the young man gently smooth out the wrinkled page and hand it back to Yu Daji. Yul Wandao took the page and handed it to Sir Hong. He said indifferently, "Sir Hong, this page can be filed away. I have already deciphered the words on the page. In a moment, I'll have to trouble you to have someone send it to Protector General Chu's study." Sir Hong took the page and glanced at it. He didn't have a deep impression. He only felt that the strokes were stiff and the transitions were stagnant. The woman played with the blade and the man embroidered flowers. It was truly unsightly. Sir Hong suddenly raised his head and saw the young man looking at him expressionlessly. He was immediately frightened.
But soon the young man smiled and said softly, "Does Sir feel that the words on the page are somewhat unsightly?"
Having been seen through, Sir Hong smiled awkwardly and didn't know how to respond. That person didn't make a fuss and only raised his voice slightly.
"Everyone in the room has worked hard."
After saying this, Sir Hong didn't have time to criticize before he walked straight to the door. Sir Hong first saw Wang Guifeng standing dumbstruck at the door. Then he saw Bailiang's Protector General Chu Lushan, Cavalry Commander Yuan Zuozong, Infantry Commander Yen Wenluan, and many other people standing behind them. Sir Hong didn't dare to keep looking. If this wasn't shocking enough, then what made Sir Hong's scalp tingle was that the young man had just stepped over the threshold and walked out.
Outside the house, a small group of people who deserved to be called the most powerful people in northern Liang were all making way for him.
Chapter 1271. In the main hall of the Governor General's office, Yen Wenluan looked at the young man wearing a black robe embroidered with gold. For some reason, his mind wandered. He remembered that when the general had put on Prince Liang's blue satin robe, he, Zhong Honggu, and Lu Yuanji couldn't help but go up and touch it. Of this group of old people, other than He Zhonghu and Chen Yunchue, Zhong Honggu was dead. Wei Taizhan and Lu Yuanji had retired from the army and returned home to retire. As for the younger group, only half of the general's 6 adopted sons were left. Yen Wenluan, as an important leader of Chongling's mountain, naturally had high hopes for Chen Jibao. In the old man's mind, Bailiang's best day was when Su Fengnian was stationed outside Chen Jibao's battle pass in Liangzhou. It was a pity that he would not be able to see this scene in this lifetime. Yan Wenluan gathered his thoughts. At this time, Su Fengnian was asking Chu Lushan about the movements of the Beimang army. Chu Lushan could not give a definite answer. Even though Beiliang's spies and crossbowmen had suffered great losses, Dongshua's messy deployment of troops confused the Governor-General's office. This was like a celestial phenomenon expert facing off against a Xian finger expert. He had the advantage but did not attack openly. At the same time, he did not play any sinister sneak attacks. Instead, he threw a flurry of punches on his own territory. He was not afraid of losing his footing. Su Fengnian joked. A large-scale shift of hundreds of thousands of troops is not child's play. This means that an astronomical amount of food and soldiers will be needed to support it. Fatty Dong is showing off his wealth to Beiliang? As one of the border commanders, great ancestor Gu's relationship with the new Prince Liang was purer than Yan Wenluan, Chen Yunchui, and He Jianghu. After all, they had met outside Beiliang, and had been an honored guest invited by Su Fengnian. So great ancestor Gu had more leeway in his words. He smiled and agreed. In any case, it is not really the wealth of this great king of the South Courtyard. It will not hurt to squander it. Chu Lushan's fingers were crossed in front of his chest, his thick arms resting on the armrests. His eyes narrowed, his lips moving as though he was talking to himself. Su Fengnian looked at great ancestor Gu. Before he could say anything, the #1 general of the old southern Tang straightened his back, straightened his clothes, and said telepathically, "Prince Liang wants to ask if we can fight outside the border?" Su Fengnian nodded. The fall of the old southern Tang was because they had given Gu Jiantang all the initiative on the battlefield. All the elite troops withdrew into the territory, which led to the destruction of the navy and the subsequent defeat. Otherwise, according to great ancestor Gu's strategy, Gu Jiantang would have to pay at least 200,000 more casualties to take down the southern Tang. More importantly, the southern Tang could use this opportunity to build up their morale and not be afraid to fight to the death. Beiliang claimed to have 300,000 cavalrymen. Of course, not all of the 300,000 border soldiers were cavalrymen. In fact, only half of them were cavalrymen. But even if they had 150,000 cavalrymen and a jaw-dropping supply of hundreds of thousands of war horses, this was definitely the reason why Beiliang dared to compete with Beimang. It could be said that if Beiliang did not have anything to worry about and if the imperial court had enough support, such an invincible cavalryman with impeccable equipment and combat power could take the initiative to attack the northwest border and look for opportunities. The reason was simple. Compared to Beimang, Beiliang's territory was considered small. They could attack from all sides and maintain their advantage in numbers in a single battlefield. Even if the cavalrymen of Beiliang were on par with the border soldiers of Beimang, or even slightly inferior, they could still defeat the border soldiers of Beimang without any suspense. Then, they would resupply and move to the next battlefield. The current predicament Beiliang was facing was that the imperial court had made up its mind to watch the fire burn across the river. Not only was there no way to retreat in the direction of western Shu, after the turmoil in Ji province and Yuan Tingshan became the strongest in Ji province, even the right side of Beiliang had become a hidden danger. It was true that Gu Jiantang could not meddle with the internal affairs of Beiliang, but it was easy for him to do something between Liao province and Beiliang. Great ancestor Gu kept them in suspense and said with a playful smile, "It's not impossible, but it depends on whether Beiliang has the courage or not." Yan Wenluan smiled and said, "General Gu mentioned something a few days ago. He said that it's not difficult to defend the mouth of the bottle gourd with the current Yuzhou army. The Yuzhou infantrymen are enough. Then, the 30,000 cavalrymen can sweep through Ji province and gain more geographical advantage for Beiliang. When the war between Liangzhou and Yuzhou is in a stalemate, the 30,000 cavalrymen can take an arc and directly attack Longyao province. In this way, Beiliang will not be in a dead-end situation where they can only be beaten. But Ji province." Chapter 1272. At this point, Yan Wenluan purposely left it blank. He Jianghu and Chen Yunchui's gazes crossed each other, and then they both looked at Su Fengnian. Since the beginning of summer in the first year of Xiangfu, the current emperor had displayed a stance that puzzled everyone in court. Even if Yang Shenxing's troops had failed, even if Yan Jinchuan's cavalry had been completely annihilated, the emperor did not show too much anger. Although the position of commander-in-chief Lu Xianxia was shaky in the wind and rain, this was not caused by the unfavorable battle situation. Instead, it was a bleak situation from the beginning, and now there were signs of it becoming more and more stable. After Yan Zhenchuan died in battle, it could be said that he was extremely honored.
He was posthumously given the title of Wuxia, and posthumously given the title of Jingzhong Marquis. His only son, Yan Daiden, immediately received an exceptional promotion. Yang Shunxing was trapped and lost the face of the court. However, it was said that a secret memorial was sent to the emperor, adding fuel to the fire for the Imperial College's Jean Lanting to impeach Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. It should have saved the lives of the Yang family, and it was not impossible for them to return to Jizhou in the future. Compared to the defeated Guangling Road, the emperor of the Zhao family obviously placed more attention on the calm Jizhou. He personally approved many memorials. Outsiders did not know the inside story, but Bailiang's side, especially Yan Wenluan and the other military leaders, knew very well that the emperor's wariness towards Cao Chongqing and the rest of the West Chu rebels who were causing trouble under his nose was far less than the Bailiang cavalry. Su Fengnian did not give a direct answer, but said softly, Chen Jibao cut off the west line of Liang, which should be the first step of Yuan Benqi's plan. The second step is to let Jizhou approach step by step. In the past, Yang Shunxing did not have the ability to do so. Even if he wanted to keep Bailiang in check, his tens of thousands of old soldiers in Jinan were unable to do so. The imperial court simply let him go to Guangling Road and hit a wall. Because of this, the local forces in Jizhou were cut off. Taking this opportunity, the imperial court needs a trustworthy new person to fill the gap. Not only must he be able to convince the public, he must also have the courage to challenge Bailiang. That mad dog Yuan's meteoric rise should be a business deal between Yuan Benqi and Gu Zhentang. Yuan Benqi can further restrain Bailiang, and Gu Zhentang can be more assured in the periphery of the East Line. Everyone is happy. Great ancestor Gu sneered. This mad dog really wants to be the new master of Jizhou. How can it be so easy to sit on the seat of the new master of Jizhou? Bailiang really can't stop him. Compared to Western Shu, Jizhou is even more of a pushover. The first thing Gu Zhentang will do is to be beaten into a sieve by Beimang's iron cavalry. Even if Yuan Tingshan is the son-in-law of the Gu family, can he really be compared to his own son? Chu Lushan laughed and said, Wealth comes from danger. Small people are always like this when they go to the gambling table. If they want to gamble, they will gamble big. They are never afraid of losing their family fortune. Speaking of which, when we fought with my foster father from the north to the south, we also put ourselves in the same situation. Although Yuan Tingshan isn't likable, he's definitely very interesting. Su Fengnian suddenly turned to look at Yan Wenluan and asked, General Yan, if you only have infantry in Yuzhou, how many Beimang soldiers can you stop? Yan Wenluan said without hesitation, one gourd outside Tuma Pass can hold 150 to 60,000 Beimang soldiers. With Honglu General Chao Xiaojiao and Hong Xinjiao as partners, they can both attack and defend at the border. Within Yuzhou, there is also the Hu leader Huang Fuqiu. 300,000. It is not a problem for the Yuzhou infantry to stop 300,000 Beimang soldiers. However, there is a time limit to this. However, this time limit is enough for the 30,000 light cavalry to provide reinforcements or attack in an emergency. Su Fengnian laughed and said, All right then. These 30,000 light cavalry will enter Jizhou from today onwards. General Chen Yunxiao's eyes lit up and asked, Are we not going to inform the imperial court? Su Fengnian replied with a question. Our Bailiang is only sending 2,000 or 3,000 cavalry to Jizhou to train. Do we need to inform them? That would be treating His Majesty as an outsider. Moreover, after going to Jizhou, the imperial court will know one day. Isn't that the same as informing them? At most, we will just have to submit another document to the Ministry of War. Su Weisheng, who was sitting beside Su Fengnian, laughed softly and said, It is clear that our Bailiang is reasonable. Chen Yunxiao suppressed his laughter. He Zhong, who was also in a good mood, could not help but laugh out loud. Your Highness, the difference between 3,000 and 30,000 seems a bit big. He Zhong suddenly waved his hand and said, 3,000 and 30,000 are only 20,000. It is not 30,000 and 300,000. Whoever wants to argue about this can argue about it. Moreover, that Minister Liu of the Ministry of War is our Highness's elder by marriage. Regardless of whether it is on the side of family or on the side of reason, Tangshi Sword Immortal should be helped. Su Fengnian rubbed his face and asked, In the past, this cavalry was made up of scattered generals and captains. If they go to Jizhou, who will lead them? Do any of you have a suitable candidate? As the general of Bailiang's 160,000 infantry, Yan Wenluan was not in a position to interrupt. After all, this was a family matter of the cavalry. Yuan Zuozong could speak, Chu Lushan could speak, and even some of the infantry generals could speak freely. However, this famous general from the spring and autumn period was too prominent, so he should be silent. However, Yan Wenluan still spoke bluntly. I have two candidates for the position of commander and deputy commander. The commander must be more astute in the use of troops than in the proper way, while the deputy commander must be relatively prudent, more proper than astute. This will allow the two of them to complement each other and prevent the cavalry from being too lame. The vice-general can be my subordinate, Zhong Tianheng. As for the general, your highness will have to use different people. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Old general, please speak. Yan Wenluan glanced at Chu Lushan and said, Then I will have to borrow someone from Protector General Chu. Chu Lushan stared and said, No. Even if you beat me to death, I will not lend him to you. That kid is an important person in the Protectorate and is also my right-hand man. In the future, I will have to rely on this kid. Su Fengnian could not help but be puzzled. Who was this extraordinary person that Lu Qiuer and Yan Wenluan liked? Yan Wenluan snorted coldly. It is not me who wants to borrow someone from you. It is His Highness who wants to borrow someone from you. Su Weisheng said indifferently, Yul Wandao is indeed qualified to lead this cavalry. Su Fengnian suddenly understood. Chu Lushan's expression was as if dozens of pounds of meat had been cut off in an instant. He sighed. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Then it is settled. Let us go take a look at the topographic map of Ji province and discuss how to move these 30,000 people. The group of people walked to the front of a few tables. Someone had already brought over two maps. One was the geographical map of the entire Ji province, and the other was the topographic map of Ji Shi. In the northern Liang military, there were countless of such maps. When Su Fengnian sent someone to invite Yul Wandao over, he stood in front of the table and looked around. Suddenly he said in a low voice, From today onwards, we in Bailiang will do what we are supposed to do. If the imperial court in Ji province dare to interfere, then we will cut off their hands and feet. In the future, if there is a conflict with any forces outside Bailiang, there is no need to inform the Mount Qing Liang Wang estate. Do it first, and after it is done, the Wang estate will help clean up the mess. Yan Wenluan, Chen Yunchue, and the other old generals all let out a long sigh at the same time. He could finally vent the resentment that he had held in for nearly 20 years in an open and above-board manner. Chapter 1273. Although the weather was cold, there was no snow. If one did not personally go to the frontier fortress, it would be difficult to understand the feeling of stars hanging over the vast plains. Su Fengnian accompanied Su Weisheng out of the Huaiyang Pass and a few miles outside the Huaiyang Pass. He was accompanied only by Chu Lushan. The old general Yan Wenluan and the new Yul Wandao of the Dragon Gate had already rushed to Yuzhou to take charge of military affairs. The latter gave Su Fengnian a report before he left, specifically describing the analysis of the battle situation in Guangling Road, focusing on Ko Zhonghuai's series of raids from one point to the other. Large-scale cavalry battles in the wilderness had always been a scene that could only be seen on the frontier battlefield. In the hinterland of the Central Plains, large and small cities were scattered like stars in the sky and blocked by rivers, making it extremely difficult for cavalry to perform. To be precise, it was extremely difficult for cavalry to fight a battle in one go. It was not difficult to fight one or several exciting battles, but to fight to the end, abandoning the infantry and using the cavalry to the greatest extent, it was a test of the ability of the commander. Chu Lushan used the faint starlight to read the report carefully along the way, admiring it so much that he could not put it down. When Su Fengnian and Su Weisheng stopped at a small broken ground, Chu Lushan carefully put away the priceless rice paper, looked at the sky, and sighed softly. Lu Shengxiang's proudest work in his life was that snowy night in Luzhou, helping Gu Jiantang take down the entire Dongyue without shedding a drop of blood. As for me, I was fortunate enough to not fail my mission when thousands of cavalry marched into Shu. In the past 10 years, these two battles have been deduced countless times by the old scholars who teach the art of war in Shangyin Academy and Imperial College. But in my opinion, this unruly Ko Zhonghuai in West Chu's new imperial court is much better than me and that assistant minister Lu. No wonder Yul Wandao, a proud and arrogant son of a powerful family, is willing to praise another son of the same age. Su Weisheng reached out his hand to ask Chu Lushan for the stack of rice paper, put it on his knee, and casually pulled out a page, saying flatly, Ko Jianghu is recognized as a generalist in Xianxia Academy, but in the eyes of some scholars, he is somewhat miscellaneous and not a master. I have played a few games with him. Su Fengnian could not help but interrupt. Second sister, can this kid beat you in a game of chess? Su Weisheng raised his head and stared blankly at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled embarrassedly and quickly shut his mouth. Chu Lushan caught a glimpse of this scene. In today's world, there were very few people who could make the young king of Beiliang admit defeat, and he could not help but laugh. In the end, Su Fengnian was afraid of the strong and picked on the weak. He glared fiercely at the gloating Chu Lushan, and the Protector General could only resentfully withdraw his smile. It must be known that a person who could make him admit defeat was equally difficult to find in the two imperial courts. Su Weisheng continued, most of the people I have played against are national chess players. Among them, Ko Jianghu is undoubtedly the weakest. However, this person's thoughts are the most unconstrained, and there is no set pattern to the game. He can play frighteningly strong moves, but he can also play stupid moves that do not make any sense, and he can also shamelessly play all the way to the end. These are not surprising. What is truly impressive about Ko Jianghu is that he has the least desire to win. This kind of opponent is very difficult to deal with on the battlefield. Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi, has clearly suffered enough. On the eastern front of West Chu, Ko Jianghu, with inferior military strength, within 20 years, consecutively captured Huangyan Pass, including Daijai's, and 6 other dangerous cities. They obtained the cities but did not defend them, giving up a temporary struggle for territory and striving to obtain an overwhelming military superiority over the enemy on a single battlefield. They nibbled away the reinforcements bit by bit, making large movements and long-distance raids. This kind of seemingly unreasonable military strategy is indeed worthy for us, Beimang, who is at a disadvantage compared to Beiliang, to learn from. Probably because he was tired of standing, Chu Lushan sat down on the grass next to Su Weisheng's wheelchair. Unexpectedly, the height of his head was still about the same as Su Weisheng's. It could be seen that this head of Beiliang's officials, Lu Qiuer's body was very large. After entering the winter, the withered grass was sparse, so he did not feel uncomfortable. He laughed and said, after the restoration of the country, West Chu's situation is quite similar to our Beiliang's. We have almost become fellow sufferers who sympathize with each other. Under the joint suppression of the 2 southern armies and several vassal kings, Chu Lushan is really like a snail in its shell. If Chao Chongqing personally went into action, forcing Yang Shenqing to be unable to use his strength, Yan Jinchuan's death in battle could be considered reasonable. But right now, West Chu only sent 2 young generals into action, and it has already caused the Zhao imperial court to be in a terrible fix. Zhao Yi had no choice but to bring out the spring snow building's auspicious general. Presumably, the battle in Guangling will not be as short as 3 months or as long as half a year as predicted by the elders of the Liang Ministry of War, and it will not even be as long as we Beiliang predicted at that time. By the time the last wisp of smoke dissipates, I am afraid it will take at least 2 years. Su Fengnian laughed coldly and said, the Zhao family's son of heaven used the New Year's auspicious talisman. His original intention was to create a new atmosphere. A new atmosphere is indeed a new atmosphere, but it is not the least bit joyous. Suppressing Beiliang and indulging Guangling, these were all created by him. I don't know if he has any regrets. Other than handing over the dragon robe and dragon throne to Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan, there is also this big mess. Chapter 1274. Su Weisheng shook his head and said in a low voice, the Zhao family is good at fishing in troubled waters in the middle of the game and making the final decision at the end of the game. Losing the first move, the Zhao family, compared to the remote Liang in the past, has a bigger family and a bigger business, so they can afford to lose more. The only difference is that in the past, the imperial court had our Su family as their vanguard. Moreover, no matter how anxious the previous emperor was, on the surface, he still trusted our father and the Su family's armored cavalry. If not for the current emperor's insistence on nailing the Su family to the northwest border, would Chao Chongqing and the remaining elders of West Chu dare to start a rebellion and seek their own death? If the Beiliang frontier army could send out 50,000 men to quell the rebellion, how could Yang Shenqing and Yan Zhenchuan lose their integrity in their later years? Chu Lushan said darkly, there's nothing we can do about it. The Zhao family's emperor is determined to be the enemy of the world. The feudal princes who split the territory, the new civil officials who gradually gathered together, and the military generals who set up independent territories, in his eyes, none of them are good people.
He wants to help his son solve this problem before he dies. The chessboard is too small to accommodate so many big chess pieces. If he really did succeed, the Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan could really be a carefree emperor who doesn't attach importance to martial arts and focuses on civil affairs. Gu Jiantang has Chen Zhibao holding him back. Without Zhang Julu, the civil officials have no leader. When the time comes, they would be too busy trying to figure out the emperor's heart. How could they care about governing the country and pacifying the world? Besides, at that time, the world would be at peace, the military generals would have retired to their fields, so it would be even less of a chance for the civil officials to fish for merit. Other than currying favor with the emperor, the civil officials after Yong Hui really have nothing to do. Don't say, that old man Yuan Benqi's calculations are very smooth. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, there's no point in talking about this. Right now, Dongzhua's specific deployment of troops and generals, other than the direction of Liuzhou, there are no detailed intelligence reports. Lu Qiuer, how long do you think Liuzhou can hold off Lu Gui's army? After that, how many Beimang border troops can be implicated and thrown into the pocket of Liuzhou? With a smile on his face, Chu Lushan said, with Little Prince's 30,000 Longxiang army helping to defend Lu province, they would not be able to defeat Lu Gui's hundreds of thousands of disorganized troops even if they were to fight for 100 years. In the eyes of future generations, no matter how we fought in the early stages of this unprecedented war with Beimang, there was no better or worse strategy. It all depended on who could accumulate advantages in the divided battlefields. From the current situation, Dongzhou clearly did not put too much thought into Liuzhou. He invited the most prestigious and also the youngest of the 13 great generals, border commander Lu Gui, to that side because he did not wish for Lu Gui to take advantage of the situation to rise up in the Central Plains. At the very least, he did not want Lu Gui to rise up too quickly and too fiercely. What I am most worried about is that Dongzhou will attack Yuzhou in a spurt of energy, attacking the Yuzhou defense line to the death without regard for losses. In the meantime, he will place his most elite troops, the Tuoba and Hongjingyan, on the northern front of Liangzhou to tie down the main force of our cavalry. Su Weisheng nodded and said, if we attack Yuzhou in the short term, it will be the most muddle-headed method Beimang can use. However, in the long term, it will be the best method to preserve Beimang's national strength. After all, Beiliang is not the Central Plains, which has a great depth. Even if Yuzhou has a few cities that can be defended, and there are many fortresses and military cities south of the mouth of the gourd, the saying that the mouth of the gourd alone can swallow up 160,000 soldiers is not an exaggeration. However, as long as Beimang has the courage to do so, they will only have to send out 100,000 soldiers to cripple Yuzhou. Next, they will have to rely on Liangzhou's main force to reinforce Yuzhou. Once this situation develops, whether or not Liuzhou is defended will no longer affect the overall situation. This is also the reason why Yan Wenwan insisted that Yu Wandao lead 30,000 light cavalry to Jizhou. He was determined to use Yuzhou to win more time and space for all of Beiliang. However, this is an action that has no choice. In the end, they will lose more than they lose. The Liang imperial court is happy to see this, but Beiliang cannot afford it. Su Weisheng folded his hands on the paper on his knees and looked into the distance. Bodyguard Chu insisted on having Liuzhou enter a stalemate, attracting the attention of both the North and South imperial courts of Beimang. He hoped that Beimang's border army would send troops to Liuzhou, but he was also worried that Dongzhou would focus on attacking Yuzhou. Over the past decade or so, Father has poured a lot of effort into Yuzhou and spent a lot of money on the soldiers. 7 years ago, during the raid led by the Dragon Waste province, he purposely stopped the border army of Liangzhou from reinforcing Yuzhou. He watched as the 30,000 soldiers of Yuzhou lost their cities and fortresses one after another, and sacrificed their lives for the northern barbarians. He wanted to make Beimang fear Yuzhou's border army, and hoped that one day, Yuzhou would not become their fatal weakness. Chu Lushan said in a low voice, "Merciful people don't command troops." Chu Lushan suddenly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. That old woman has been purging Beimang's Jianghu forces for many years. Now she can finally be put to use. On the border, those experts are keeping a close eye on the big and small passes. As long as they see someone quietly crossing the border, they will kill him on the spot regardless of his identity. Many of our men have sacrificed spies who have been lurking for many years can hardly pass on important military intelligence. This time, the chess and sword music school and the Princess Grave have all been mobilized to seal off the news from the border and cooperate with Dongzhuo's border army. This move is really ruthless. Fu Shui room has suffered heavy losses after being traced back to Bei Mang. Many provinces have been uprooted after many years of operations. Chu Lushan, who was squatting on the ground, rubbed his cheeks. That's not all. Not long ago, Bei Mang deliberately let a spy return. He had 16 heads of his colleagues from Fu Shui room in his luggage. When the spy saw me, he cried and said that if it wasn't for the fact that he hoped Fu Shui room could take back these heads, he would rather die than return to Beilyong. After the spy put down his luggage, he borrowed a cold knife and committed suicide that night. He didn't say his last words, he didn't write his will, he didn't leave anything behind. Chu Lushan said in a muffled voice, "Our new cold knife hasn't even started killing the northern barbarians, but it was used as a suicide by one of our own. If I continue to hold in this